He was just an ordinary father driving home in a storm. But one single accident, one unconscious woman trapped inside a burning car, erased everything he had built in less than 48 hours. His house burned to the ground, his 7-year-old daughter running through the woods at midnight, and a billion-dollar corporation hunting him like an animal. This is the story of an ordinary man thrown into a deadly game he never chose to enter, and what he was willing to do to protect the only person left who mattered. If you haven't liked and commented the name of your city yet, do it right now. I want to see how far this story has traveled, and stay until the very end, because the finale will leave you breathless. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, and Owen Carter's windshield wipers were losing the argument. He leaned forward in the driver's seat, squinting through the glass like that extra 2 inches of proximity would somehow make the mountain road easier to see. It didn't. The high beams just turned the rain into a wall of white static, the kind that makes your eyes ache and your brain start playing tricks. Shadows becoming deer, curves becoming straight lines, nothing being exactly what it looked like. His truck was a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard, a heater that worked maybe 60% of the time, and a passenger seat that still had a purple crayon wedged underneath it from the last time Lily rode along. He hadn't moved the crayon. He didn't plan to. The job site in Ridgecrest had run long. That was nothing new. Owen worked construction, framing and foundation work mostly, and the foreman on this particular project, a thick-necked man named Garrett, who chewed tobacco and spoke exclusively in complaints, had decided at 4:30 in the afternoon that the concrete pour needed to happen tonight, or not at all. So it happened tonight. Owen stayed because he needed the hours. He always needed the hours. He'd called his neighbor Mrs. Pacheco at 5, told her he'd be late, asked if she could feed Lily dinner and keep her until he got back. Mrs. Pacheco said of course, the way she always did, with that gentle patience that made Owen feel both grateful and quietly ashamed that a 63-year-old retired schoolteacher was doing more parenting of his daughter than he sometimes felt he was. "She's fine, Owen," Mrs. Pacheco had said. "She ate 2 plates of rice and she's watching her cartoon. Drive safe." "Yes, ma'am." Now it was past 11. The rain had turned Route 9 into something close to a river, and Owen was 40 minutes from home on a road that didn't believe in guardrails. He had the radio on low, some AM station out of Flagstaff, playing classic country that kept fading in and out with the storm. He wasn't really listening. He was doing math in his head the way he did most nights. The math never changed, and it never added up clean, but he did it anyway, like a habit he couldn't quit. Lily's surgery. That was always the centerpiece of the math. Spinal stenosis, the doctors called it. A narrowing of the spinal canal that pressed on her nerves and caused her legs to give out without warning. She'd fallen 3 times at school this year, once in the parking lot. The concrete took a strip of skin off her knee, and she hadn't cried. She never cried. She just looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Dad, my legs did the thing again." The surgery was called a laminectomy. The surgeon who'd explained it to Owen had used a lot of words that meant nothing to him, but the number at the bottom of the estimate sheet meant plenty. $94,000. After insurance, the garbage insurance he got through work, which covered about as much as a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, he was still looking at $62,000 out of pocket. He had $4,211 in his savings account. Owen rolled his neck and heard it crack. He turned the radio down further and tried to focus on the road. That's when he saw the gap in the guardrail. It wasn't much. A section of bent metal, maybe 20 feet of it, angled outward like something had hit it and kept going, fresh. He could tell because the broken ends were still clean, not rusted, catching his headlights in a way that old damage wouldn't. He almost drove past it. Later, he wouldn't be able to say exactly why he slowed down. Maybe it was the angle of the bent rail. Maybe it was something his brain registered before his conscious mind caught up, the absence of something that should have been there. The way the darkness past the gap looked different from the darkness around it. Deeper, somehow. More vertical. He pulled the truck over onto the narrow gravel shoulder, tires crunching, and sat there for a second with the engine idling and the wipers slapping back and forth. "Don't," he said out loud to nobody. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove box, pulled his jacket tighter, and got out of the truck. The rain hit him like a physical thing. Cold, hard, sideways. He was soaked through his jacket before he'd taken 10 steps. The flashlight threw a shaking yellow beam across the asphalt as he walked toward the gap in the rail, and when he reached the edge and looked down into the ravine, his stomach dropped. The car was about 40 feet below, a low, dark shape wedged against a cluster of pine trees that had stopped it from rolling further. Even from up here, Owen could see the steam rising from the crumpled hood. One headlight was still on, pointing uselessly up into the rain. The other was dark. The driver's side was crushed inward, like the car had rolled at least once before the trees caught it. And then he saw it. A flicker. Orange and fast, not lightning, fire, coming from somewhere under the chassis. Oh no! Owen was already moving before the words finished leaving his mouth. The ravine wall was steep and slick with mud. He went down sideways, digging his boots in at angles, grabbing at exposed roots and rocks, losing his footing twice and catching himself once on a root that tore his palm and once on pure animal instinct. The flashlight swung wildly. The rain roared in his ears. When he hit the bottom, he went straight to the car. Up close, it was worse. The vehicle was a Porsche. He could make out the badge through the crumpled hood, and it had come apart the way sports cars do when they meet physics at the wrong speed. The front end was destroyed. The driver's door was bent inward at a brutal angle, the window gone, glass scattered across the mud and the pine needles. The fire under the chassis was small, but it was growing. He could smell it. Burning plastic, rubber, something hot and chemical underneath that. His brain translated that smell into a countdown without being asked. He bent down and looked through the shattered window. She was in the driver's seat. Young. His age, maybe close. Dark hair plastered across her face by the rain coming through the broken window. Seatbelt still on, which had probably saved her life. But her head was tilted at an angle that scared him. Blood on her temple, dark against pale skin. Not a cut from glass. Something blunt. The airbag had deployed and gone flat, lying against the steering wheel like a deflated balloon. Hey! He reached in and touched her shoulder. Hey, can you hear me? Nothing. I need you to wake up. The car is on fire. I need you to help me help you. Her eyelids moved, just barely. There you go. Owen was already reaching for the seatbelt. I'm going to get you out. Don't fight me. Just let me work. The buckle was jammed. Of course it was. He worked it with both hands, slick with rain and mud and the blood from his torn palm. And for a long moment nothing happened, and he could feel the heat from under the car increasing and hear a new sound, a low, ominous crackling. And he was very aware of how alone they were on this mountain in this storm. The buckle released. He got his arms around her from through the window, under her arms, and pulled. She was limp, but not completely. Some part of her was still functional enough to not be dead weight, and that helped. He got her halfway out through the window frame, and then her foot caught on something inside, and he had to reach back in and work it free. And when it came loose, he went backward, and she came with him, and they both went down into the mud. Owen landed on his back with her on top of him. He lay there for exactly 1 second. The night air felt enormous above him, the rain falling straight down into his face. And then the fire under the car made a sound like a breath being drawn in, and he got up. He hooked his arms under hers from behind and dragged her, backward, through the mud, away from the car, toward the trees on the far side of the ravine. His boots slipped and he went to one knee and got up and kept going. He wasn't thinking. There was nothing in his head except distance and direction and the sound of the fire getting louder behind him. 30 feet, 40. He got her behind a thick stand of pines and dropped to his knees in the mud beside her. The Porsche exploded. It wasn't like the movies, no massive fireball, no Hollywood shockwave. It was a hard, thumping burst of orange light that lit up the whole ravine for about 2 seconds, and then turned into a column of black smoke and crackling flame. The heat reached him even behind the trees, a wave of it, sudden and physical. Owen sat in the mud with his heart doing things it wasn't designed to do, and looked at the burning car and breathed. Then he looked at the woman. She was alive. He could see her chest moving, shallow, uneven, but moving. Her face was a mess. The blood from her temple had spread, her lip was cut, there was mud in her hair and on her cheek and everywhere else, but she was breathing. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. Wet, but still working. He had a cracked screen protector that had been doing its job for 8 months. He dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Car accident on Route 9, up in the mountain section. I'm not sure of the exact mile marker, but it's maybe 15 miles north of the junction with Highway 41. The car went through a guardrail and into a ravine. The vehicle is on fire. It exploded, actually. There's one survivor, unconscious. She's breathing. I need an ambulance. Okay, sir, I'm dispatching now. Are you injured? I'm fine. She's the one who needs help. Can you stay on the line with me? Yeah. He stayed on the line. He told them what he could. The make of the car, the direction he'd been traveling, the rough description of the area. While he talked, he took off his jacket and laid it over the woman because the rain was still coming down and she was in a sleeveless blouse that was already soaked through. He kept his hand near her neck, feeling her pulse, counting it, not because he knew what the numbers meant, but because it gave him something to do that wasn't panic. Her pulse was weak. Faster than it should be, he thought, though he wasn't sure he actually knew what it should be. At some point, her eyes opened. Not all the way. Half. She looked up at him through the rain and the firelight from the burning wreck, and Owen saw her eyes try to focus and mostly fail. You're okay, he said, which was probably a lie, but it was the only thing that seemed right. Help's coming. Her hand moved, found his wrist, held it. Not tight. She didn't have the strength for tight, but deliberately, like she was trying to make sure he was real. Don't move, he said. You might have neck stuff. Just stay still. Her lips moved. He leaned closer. The rain was loud. Drive, she said, or something like it. Her voice was barely there. What? Flash. A pause. A long, rattling breath. Flash drive. She stopped. Her hand went to his jacket pocket, the one on the outside of his chest, and she pressed something into it. Small. Hard. He felt it go in. What is... Don't... She swallowed. It looked like it cost her something. Don't let them. Her eyes went unfocused. Someone inside, someone in the... And then she was gone again. Not dead. He checked immediately, but unconscious, the kind that doesn't answer back. Owen sat in the mud in the rain beside a burning car on the side of a mountain with his hand pressed against an unconscious woman's neck to feel her pulse, and he looked at the thing she'd put in his jacket pocket. A flash drive. Small, black, unmarked except for a tiny strip of silver tape on one end. He put it back in his pocket. The ambulance took 22 minutes. He heard the sirens before he saw the lights. They came from both directions, actually, an ambulance from the north and a sheriff's deputy from the south. Getting down into the ravine took them a few minutes even with proper equipment. Owen watched from where he was crouched beside the woman, not moving, keeping his hand near her pulse. When the paramedics reached them, the first one took one look at Owen and said, "Sir, are you hurt?" "I'm fine. She's the one." "You're bleeding." He looked at his hand. The palm he'd torn on the route coming down the ravine had opened back up and was leaking steadily. He hadn't noticed. "That's old," he said, which was barely true. "She's the priority." They worked on her fast and professional, the way people do when they do something every day. One paramedic held her head immobile while the other checked her vitals and talked in numbers and abbreviations. They got a collar on her neck and a board under her and had her moving toward the ravine wall within 4 minutes. The sheriff's deputy found Owen, mid-40s, rain gear, tired eyes under the brim of his hat. "Sir, what happened here?" Owen told him the short version, saw the gap in the guardrail, stopped, looked, went down, got her out before the car went up. He left out the flash drive. He didn't know why, exactly. Some instinct, or maybe just the way she'd said, "Don't let them," the fear in those barely open eyes. The deputy took his name and number and asked him to come into the station tomorrow for a full statement. Owen said yes. Then the deputy looked at his truck, still sitting on the shoulder above. "You're going to follow us to Mercy General?" Owen hesitated. Here was the thing about Owen Carter and law enforcement. There were 2 outstanding parking violations from 8 months ago, plus 1 unpaid toll citation that had accumulated into a bench warrant he hadn't dealt with because dealing with it required money he didn't have. The warrant was small, the kind that would likely result in nothing more than a fine and a lecture. But there was a version of events where a cop ran his plates on a busy night and decided to impound his truck and leave him stranded. Without his truck, he couldn't get to work. Without work, he couldn't pay for anything. Without anything, Lily had nothing. It was a stupid calculation. He knew it was stupid even as he made it, but when you live that close to the edge, stupid calculations start to feel like survival. "I'll go check on her at the hospital," he told the deputy. "I'll follow you up." He followed the ambulance to Mercy General. He sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes, dripping on the plastic chair, watching the ER doors. A nurse came out at some point and told him the woman was in surgery and her condition was serious, but the doctors were working. Owen thanked her and asked if she had any family they were contacting. "We found ID on her," the nurse said. "We're making calls." "Okay?" He nodded. "Good." He waited another 10 minutes. Nobody came through the ER doors who looked like they belonged to the woman. No family, no friends, no one. The waiting room was him, an old man asleep in the corner, and a young couple with a sick child who'd stopped crying about 20 minutes ago. Owen got up and left. He told himself it was because of the warrant. He told himself the woman was in good hands, in surgery, being cared for by people who knew what they were doing. He told himself he'd given his name and number to the deputy, and they could reach him if they needed to. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was that he was scared, not of the men who'd come. He didn't know about them yet. He was scared of the flash drive in his pocket, of the woman's voice saying someone inside, of the way she'd pressed it into his hand like she was passing a torch rather than an object. He drove home in the rain with the heater working at about 40% and the purple crayon still wedged under the passenger seat. He got home at 1:15 in the morning, and Mrs. Pacheco opened her door in a bathrobe and gave him a look that combined relief and reproach in about equal measure. "She's asleep," Mrs. Pacheco said. "You look terrible." "I had a long night." "I can see that. What happened to your hand?" "Nothing." "Thank you, Mrs. Pacheco. I'll explain in the morning." He carried Lily home through the dark. She woke up just enough to make a small sound and put her arms around his neck, and then went straight back under. He put her in her bed and stood in the doorway for a minute, watching her breathe, the way he'd done more times than he could count since the day she was born. She was the whole math. She was the whole equation. Every hour he worked and every dollar he scraped and every night he drove home exhausted on mountain roads in the rain. It was all for this. This 7-year-old who still had a purple crayon phase and fell asleep watching cartoons and trusted him completely to keep the world manageable. He went to his own room and took the flash drive out of his pocket and set it on the nightstand. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned off the light. He woke up at 6:12 to Lily standing next to his bed in her pajamas, holding a bowl of cereal she'd poured herself, which meant there was almost certainly milk on the kitchen floor. "Dad, your hand has a thing on it." He looked at his palm. He'd wrapped it with some gauze and medical tape the night before, doing a mediocre job of it. "I got a cut." "From what?" "I'll tell you about it later. There's milk on the floor, isn't there?" "Some." "Go eat at the table. I'll be out in a minute." He lay there for another 30 seconds, staring at the ceiling, and remembered everything that had happened. He picked up his phone from the nightstand and opened a browser and typed the only thing he knew about the woman: car accident, Route 9 mountain luxury car. The results came up fast. There were 3 articles already, posted between 2 and 4 in the morning. Billionaire tech founder Victoria Ashford. Critically injured in single vehicle crash. Owen sat up. He read the first article twice. Victoria Ashford, 30, founder and CEO of a tech company called Ashford Systems, a defense and cybersecurity firm worth somewhere north of $4 billion, according to the article, had been involved in a single-car accident on Route 9. She had been transported to Mercy General Hospital in critical condition. Police were investigating the cause of the accident. No other details were available at this time. The photo in the article was a professional headshot. Dark hair, sharp eyes, expression that said she was used to being the smartest person in any given room. Owen recognized her face despite the blood and the mud. He put the phone down and looked at the flash drive on his nightstand. Someone inside. Don't let them. Dad! Lily's voice from the kitchen. There's a car in front of our house. Owen got up. He walked to the front window and moved the curtain 2 inches with one finger and looked out. There were two of them. Black SUVs parked on the street in front of the house, engines running. He could see exhaust in the cold morning air. He couldn't see inside the vehicles from this angle. His stomach dropped the same way it had when he'd looked over the edge of the ravine the night before. He had lived in this neighborhood for 4 years. Nobody parked like that on this street. Nobody parked two big black SUVs in front of a construction worker's modest house at 6 in the morning with the engines running. Lily, he kept his voice even. Come here, baby. She appeared in the hallway with the cereal bowl, reading his face the way she always did. She was good at that, better than most adults he knew. Her expression shifted from curious to serious without passing through scared, which told him she trusted him enough to wait and see. Leave your bowl. Come with me. He took her hand and walked her to the back of the house, to the small mudroom by the back door. He grabbed his work jacket off the hook, reached back into the bedroom for the flash drive and his wallet and his phone, and picked up the go bag he kept by the back door. Not because he was a paranoid man, but because he was a father who'd read too many weather emergency articles and had a kid with a medical condition and liked having a bag with a first aid kit and 3 days of granola bars and a water filter. He'd never used it for anything except camping. Dad, Lily said, what's happening? He knelt down in front of her, looked her in the eyes. We're going to go out the back and walk to the park, he said. Through the Hendersons' yard, like we did during the fire drill that time. It's cold. I know, put your shoes on. She put her shoes on. She didn't ask any more questions. That was the thing about Lily. She had a 7-year-old's instincts about when to push and when to just move. And right now she was moving. Owen opened the back door quietly. Behind them, he heard the sound of car doors opening on the street out front. He took Lily's hand, and they walked fast into the gray morning, through the wet grass of the backyard, toward the gap in the fence that led to the Hendersons' yard beyond, and then the park beyond that, and then whatever came after. The flash drive was in his pocket. Behind him, someone knocked on his front door, then knocked again, harder. Then the knocking stopped. The park was empty at this hour, which was the only thing working in their favor. Owen moved fast, keeping Lily's hand tight in his, cutting across the wet grass toward the tree line on the far side, where a drainage ditch ran under the fence to the adjacent neighborhood. He didn't look back. Looking back would slow him down, and he already knew what was behind him. He could hear it, faintly, over the sound of their footsteps in the wet grass. Voices. Not shouting, which was almost worse. Controlled voices, the kind that belonged to people who weren't panicking because they didn't need to panic. They had numbers and resources and time, and Owen had a 7-year-old in pajama pants and a go bag with granola bars. Dad, you're walking too fast. I know. Keep up. My legs. I've got you. He scooped her up without breaking stride, shifted the go bag to one shoulder and carried her on the other arm. She was 48 pounds. He'd carried worse on job sites. His torn palm screamed at the grip, but he adjusted and kept moving. The drainage ditch was narrow and smelled like mud and old leaves. Owen went through it sideways, holding Lily above the waterline, and came out the other side into the Millbrook neighborhood, a grid of small houses with cars in the driveways, and nobody awake yet. He set Lily down on the sidewalk. She looked up at him. Her dark eyes were serious and dry, and he loved her so much it felt like a physical weight sitting on his chest. Are those men bad? She asked. He crouched down to her level. I don't know what they are yet, but we're hiding from them. We're being careful. He pulled the go bag around and unzipped the front pocket. Put this on. He handed her the fleece he kept in there, adult small, which meant it went to her knees. She put it on without complaining. Are you cold? A little. I know. I'm sorry. He zipped the pocket back up and looked around. 3 blocks east, there was a 24-hour diner he'd been to twice, the kind with sticky laminate menus and coffee that tasted like it had been on the burner since Tuesday. Right now, it was the best place he could think of. Somewhere to sit, somewhere warm, somewhere public enough that nobody would do anything dramatic. We're going to go get breakfast, he told Lily. In my pajamas? Yeah. She looked down at herself, cartoon dogs on light blue flannel, and then back up at him. Okay, she said, in the tone that meant she'd decided to table her objections for now. They walked the 3 blocks to the diner. Owen kept his eyes moving the whole way. The diner was called Mel's, which was either the owner's name or aspirational. Owen wasn't sure. A bell above the door announced them to a nearly empty room. 2 truckers at the counter, one old woman in a corner booth with a newspaper, a teenage waitress refilling salt shakers who looked up with the expression of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Sit anywhere," the waitress said. Owen picked a booth in the back with a clear sight line to the door. He put Lily on the inside seat and sat across from her. The waitress came over. Her name tag said Bree. She looked at Lily's pajamas, and then at Owen's bandaged hand and mud-stained jeans, and then back at Lily's pajamas. "Pancakes," she said to Lily. Lily looked at Owen. "Yeah," Owen said. "Pancakes. And coffee for me. Black." "You got it." Bree left without writing anything down. Owen put his phone on the table and pulled up the news. The story about Victoria Ashford was still there, unchanged from what he'd read that morning. Critical condition, investigation ongoing, no other details. He searched for updates. Found one, posted 40 minutes ago, and his throat tightened when he read it. Victoria Ashford, 30, founder and CEO of Ashford Systems, has died of injuries sustained in last night's single-vehicle accident on Route 9. Hospital officials confirmed the time of death at 5:47 a.m. No statement has been released by the company at this time. Owen read it twice. Then he put the phone face down on the table. She had been alive when he left the hospital, breathing, in surgery, being worked on. 4 hours later, she was dead. He didn't know what that meant. Whether it was the injuries, whether something had gone wrong in surgery, whether it was something else entirely. But combined with the men outside his house at 6 in the morning, it meant something. It meant the situation he'd walked into on that mountainside was not a car accident and a Good Samaritan story. It was something else, with edges he couldn't see yet. Lily was looking at him from across the table. She had her hands folded in front of her like a small, serious professor. "Dad," she said, "what's on your phone?" "Nothing." "You made a face." "I didn't make a face." "You made the face you make when something's wrong and you don't want to tell me." He looked at her. 7 years old. 7 years old, and already she could read him like a book he'd never meant to leave open. "There was an accident last night," he said carefully. "I helped someone, and now some people want to ask me questions about it, and I'm not ready to answer them yet." She considered this. "Are you in trouble?" "Not if I'm careful." "Are we going to be okay?" He reached across the table and covered her folded hands with his, the bandaged one. He could feel his pulse in his palm. "Yeah," he said, "we're going to be okay." Bree came back with coffee and a plate of pancakes with a side of butter shaped like a small star, which Lily examined with great interest. Owen drank his coffee and thought. The flash drive was in his front jeans pocket. He could feel the hard plastic edge of it every time he shifted in the seat. He thought about what Victoria Ashford had said, or tried to say, in those last half-conscious seconds in the mud. Flash drive. Don't let them. Someone inside her company, which meant this wasn't about an outside threat. It was internal, which was its own category of dangerous, the kind where the people trying to bury the truth had access to resources and information and systems that outsiders didn't. The kind where they already knew things about you before you knew they existed. They'd known where he lived. They'd shown up before sunrise. That wasn't random. That was research, and it had happened fast, which meant whoever they were, they had reach. He needed to think, and he needed more information, and he had a 7-year-old eating pancakes across from him, which narrowed his options considerably. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He stared at it through 2 full rings, then picked up. "Yeah." "Mr. Carter." The voice was male, smooth, the kind of smooth that comes from years of practice making itself sound reasonable. "My name is Damian Blackwood. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Ashford Systems. I believe you had an encounter with our founder last night." Owen said nothing. "I want to start by saying that what happened to Victoria was a tragedy. The entire company is in mourning." A pause. "I also want to say that we're aware of everything you did last night. Going down that ravine in those conditions, getting her out before the vehicle ignited, that was remarkable. Genuinely. You're a brave man. How'd you get this number? We have resources, Mr. Carter. That's not what's important right now. What's important is that Victoria may have given you something before she lost consciousness. Something that belongs to the company. Owen looked at Lily. She was cutting her pancakes into precise triangles, concentrating hard on the geometry of it. I don't know what you're talking about, Owen said. The smooth voice didn't change. I think you do, and I want to be completely transparent with you. The drive contains proprietary intellectual property and sensitive corporate data. It's not something that was meant to leave Victoria's possession. Whatever she told you in those final moments, she was badly injured and likely not in full command of her faculties. She seemed pretty clear to me. A short silence. When Blackwood spoke again, something underneath the smoothness had shifted just slightly, like ice cracking under weight. Mr. Carter, I know about your daughter, Lily, yes? I know about her condition, about the surgery she needs, about the financial situation you're in. Another pause, letting that land. I want to help you. That's the truth. Hand over the drive and I will personally ensure that every medical expense associated with Lily's treatment is covered, completely. No conditions, no strings. The diner felt very quiet suddenly. The clinking of forks and the distant hiss of the griddle seemed far away. Owen's hand tightened on the phone. That's a generous offer, he said, and his voice surprised him. How flat it came out. How steady. Like something in him had gone very still. For a drive you say you don't know I have. Silence. I'll think about it, Owen said, and hung up. He sat very still for a moment. Lily looked up from her pancakes. Who was that? Wrong number, he said. She squinted at him. She didn't believe him. She was 7, not stupid. But she went back to her pancakes, and Owen sat with the phone in his hand and tried to keep his breathing even while his mind went through what had just happened. They knew about Lily. They knew about the surgery, about the money, about the exact wound they could press on to make him fold. That wasn't something you learned from a name and a phone number. That was deep research, the kind that took hours or access to databases that regular people didn't have. They'd had that information ready before they called him, which meant they'd been building that file since sometime last night, since before dawn, since before she died. Which meant they'd known who he was before Victoria Ashford was even pronounced dead. The math on that didn't work unless they'd already been monitoring the situation, unless they'd already known about the accident, about the driver, about the rescue, unless someone had been watching. Owen put a 20 on the table, more than the bill, not enough to wait for change, and stood up. We need to go, he told Lily. I'm not done. Take the last pancake. Roll it up. She gave him a look that communicated her feelings about rolled up pancakes, but she did it, wrapping the last triangle in a napkin, and she slid out of the booth and took his hand. They were out the door and 2 blocks away before Owen heard the black SUV turn onto the street behind them. What? He didn't run. Running would tell them he'd seen them, and right now the only advantage he had was that they didn't know exactly what he planned to do. He walked, Lily's hand in his, pace steady, turning once at the next intersection and then again at the one after that, cutting back into the residential streets where the SUV couldn't follow without being obvious. He ducked into the gap between 2 houses and crouched down, putting his back against the brick, pulling Lily close. Dad? Shh. He heard the SUV slow at the intersection. Idle. Then move on. He counted to 30. Then he stood up and looked both ways and took Lily out the back way, through someone's unfenced backyard, across an alley, and out onto a different street entirely. His phone buzzed again. Different unknown number. He didn't answer. He needed a car he wasn't already in. His truck was back on the street in front of his house, which was where the men had been this morning, and that was done. He needed somewhere safe to put Lily while he figured out the next move, and he needed to think without someone rolling up on him every 20 minutes. The only person he trusted enough to call was Mrs. Pacheco, and that was exactly why he wasn't going to call her. Whatever this was, he wasn't bringing it to a 63-year-old woman's doorstep. He thought about his brother Danny. Danny lived 4 hours away in Tucson, and they talked maybe twice a year. Christmas, and whenever Danny needed to borrow money, he wasn't going to pay back. Not an option. He thought about his foreman, Garrett, also not an option. Garrett was the kind of man who would help you move a couch, but would absolutely fold under any form of actual pressure. He stood on a residential sidewalk in the early morning with his daughter eating a rolled-up pancake and ran through every person he knew and came up mostly empty. Then he thought of Marcus Webb. Marcus was a guy Owen had worked a job with 3 years ago, framing a commercial building out in Sycamore Ridge. Ex-Army, quiet, knew about 12 different ways to fix things that had no business being fixed. They'd had beers a few times after work. Owen had helped him move a water heater once. It wasn't a deep friendship, but it was a real one, the kind built on actual hours spent together rather than social media comments. Marcus had given Owen his number and said, "Anything comes up, call me." The way people say things sometimes, not knowing if they mean it until the moment arrives. Owen called him. It rang 4 times. Owen's stomach was already preparing for voicemail when Marcus picked up, voice rough with sleep. "Carter, it's 6:30 in the morning. I know, I need help." A pause. The sound of sheets moving, someone sitting up. "What kind of help?" "The kind where I need somewhere to be that isn't where I am, me and Lily." Another pause, longer this time. "You in trouble?" "I think so. I don't have the whole picture yet." "You do something?" "I pulled a woman out of a burning car last night. Apparently that was the wrong move." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Owen could hear him breathing, could almost hear him deciding. "Give me 40 minutes, Marcus said. "There's a 7-Eleven on Decker Avenue and Reardon Street. You know it?" "I'll find it." "I'll be in a gray Tacoma. Don't call me again from that number." The line went dead. Owen put the phone in his pocket and looked at Lily. "We're meeting a friend." "The pancake is gone," she said, showing him the empty napkin. "Good. Let's walk." Sant. Marcus Webb was 41 years old, built like a man who'd spent his 20s carrying things that were too heavy, and his 30s figuring out how to put them down. He was already in the 7-Eleven parking lot when Owen arrived, leaning against the gray Tacoma with a paper cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had seen enough unusual things that unusual things no longer surprised him. He looked Owen up and down. He looked at Lily. He looked at Owen's bandaged hand and the go bag and the fact that they'd clearly come from somewhere on foot. "Hey, Lily," he said. Lily looked at him with evaluation in her eyes. "Hi. You want a snack? They've got those little donuts inside." She looked at Owen. He nodded. Marcus fished a 5 out of his jacket and handed it to her. "Get whatever you want. We'll be right here." Lily went inside. Marcus watched her go, then turned back to Owen. "Talk," he said. Owen talked. He gave Marcus the short version. The accident, the ravine, the woman, the flash drive, the men outside his house, the phone call from Blackwood. Marcus listened without interrupting, drinking his coffee, his face doing nothing in particular except paying attention. When Owen finished, Marcus crushed the paper cup in one hand. "Victoria Ashford," Marcus said. "Ashford Systems. You know them?" "I know of them. Defense contracts, cybersecurity. They've got government work, the kind that doesn't get published." He looked at the 7-Eleven door, then back at Owen. "That drive could be anything. Software, financial records. Something that would get people indicted." He looked at Owen levelly. "Or something that would get people killed to keep it quiet." "That's what I figured." "You look at what's on it?" "I don't have a way to open it. It's encrypted. I could see a password prompt when I tested it on my phone with an adapter." Marcus nodded slowly. "And they offered you money. Enough to cover Lily's surgery, all of it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You think they'd actually pay?" "I think they'd pay and then figure out what to do with me afterward." Marcus looked at him for a long beat. "Yeah," he said. "That's probably right." Lily came back out with a bag of powdered donuts and a look on her face that said she felt she'd negotiated well. "Okay," Marcus said. He opened the Tacoma's back door. "Get in, both of you. I've got a place." Then the place was a single-story rental house on the outskirts of a town called Delmont, about 20 miles from Owen's neighborhood, the kind of town that appears on maps but not in conversation, with one gas station and a Dollar General and fields on 3 sides. Marcus had rented it 8 months ago for reasons he described as needing some space, which Owen didn't press on. It had 2 bedrooms, a wood-burning stove that actually worked, and no neighbors within a quarter mile. Marcus made eggs while Lily fell asleep on the couch under a blanket, the stress of the morning catching up with her the way it does with kids, suddenly and completely, like a switch flipping. Owen sat at the kitchen table and put the flash drive in the middle of it and stared at it. "You said she told you a password," Marcus said from the stove, or tried to. "She said flash drive, and then something that might have been a word, and someone inside. That was about it. She was mostly gone by then." "So you have part of a password from a half-conscious woman in the rain. That's something." Marcus set a plate in front of Owen. "Eat. You look like you haven't slept." Owen ate. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the eggs were in front of him. Marcus sat across from him with his own plate. "Here's what I know about encrypted drives. If she was the one who encrypted it, the password is something she could remember. Not random characters. Something meaningful. People don't use random strings for things they need to actually access under pressure. She said something that sounded like flash. That might have been her trying to say flash drive again, or it might have been part of the word. Or both," Marcus said. "Sometimes people encode information in the thing they're handing you. The hint is the object." Owen thought about that. He thought about her final words, the order of them, the effort it had cost her to get them out. Flash drive. Flash something, someone inside. He thought about her name. Victoria Ashford, Ashford Systems. He thought about the way she'd pressed the drive into his jacket pocket, like she'd been waiting for the moment, like she'd known the accident was coming or had at least planned for the possibility that she might need to hand something off. Someone inside. A betrayal. Someone who knew her movements well enough to arrange an accident on a mountain road at night in a storm. Someone close. His phone buzzed. He'd turned off location services and switched to Marcus's Wi-Fi, but the phone itself was still the same device. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Again. He answered. "Mr. Carter?" Blackwood's voice, the smooth one, but with something different underneath it now. Less patience. "I want to revisit our conversation from this morning." "We don't need to." "I think we do. You left your home in a hurry. That concerns me. It suggests you might be making decisions based on incomplete information, and I'd hate for this to escalate unnecessarily." "Escalate," Owen repeated. "We know about your truck. We know about the bench warrant. We know you're somewhere in Millbrook or Delmont, approximately. Yes, we're aware of your general location. And we know that you're alone with your daughter, with no money to speak of and no legal resources, and a fugitive complication that makes calling the police a complicated option for you." Owen's jaw was tight. Under the table, his hand was flat on his thigh, and he was pressing it down to keep it still. "We're not bad people, Mr. Carter. We're trying to manage a crisis that your involvement has complicated. Hand over the drive, take the money, get Lily her surgery. Walk away from something that isn't your problem." "You called it a crisis," Owen said. "Not a tragedy. 20 minutes ago, you called it a tragedy." A beat of silence. "Language is imprecise when you're grieving," Blackwood said. "Victoria Ashford is barely 6 hours dead, and you're running operations to recover corporate property. That's not grief. That's business." The smooth voice went quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, Owen heard something shift. A quality of stillness that was different from patience, like the pause before something stops being careful. "Mr. Carter," Blackwood said, and the smoothness was still there, but thinner now, like paint wearing off something harder underneath. "I've been trying to handle this professionally. I want you to understand that my professional options are not my only options." "I understand you fine," Owen said, and hung up. Marcus was watching him from across the table. "He knows we're in Delmont," Owen said. "Roughly." "Then we've got maybe an hour before they narrow it down." Marcus stood up, already moving. "Lily needs to stay somewhere they can't trace to you, anyone in your life they wouldn't know about." Owen thought, "Mrs. Pacheco, she's my neighbor. She's watched Lily before, but not a neighbor. They'll check neighbors. My sister-in-law, ex-sister-in-law, technically. She lives in Barron's Point. We don't talk much. There's no reason they'd connect." "Name?" "Sandra. Sandra Reyes. She kept her maiden name after the divorce." You trust her with Lily. Owen thought about Sandra, thought about the last time they'd spoken, 8 months ago, a birthday call for Lily that had been slightly awkward but genuinely warm. Sandra was solid. She was a nurse. She was careful. She loved Lily. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I trust her. Call her. Don't explain everything. Just tell her you need her to take Lily for a few days, that it's an emergency, that you'll explain when you can, and use my phone. Marcus was already pulling it out. Not yours. Owen called Sandra on Marcus's phone. She picked up on the second ring, and when he explained, keeping it brief, keeping it calm, the way you talk to someone you need to not panic, she said, "Is Lily okay?" First, before anything else, which was the right thing to say. "She's okay. She doesn't know much. I need you to keep her safe and not tell anyone where she is." "Owen, what's going on?" "I'll explain everything when I can. Right now I just need to know she's with you." A long pause. "Okay," Sandra said. "Okay. Tell me where to come." Sandra arrived in Delmont 90 minutes later in a blue Honda Civic with a car seat in the back and the expression of a woman who had decided to ask her questions in the correct order, which meant after the child was safe. Waking Lily up and explaining it was the hardest part. Owen sat on the edge of the couch and gently shook her shoulder until her eyes opened, and she looked at him with the soft confusion of someone coming up from deep sleep. And then the confusion cleared and was replaced by something more alert because she remembered the morning. "You have to go with Sandra for a few days," Owen said. Lily blinked. She pushed herself up to sitting. She looked at Sandra, who was standing in the doorway with a careful smile that didn't reach her eyes but was trying hard. "Hey, Bug," Sandra said. "Want to come stay with me?" Lily looked back at Owen. "For how long?" "Few days, maybe less." "Are you coming?" "Not yet." She was quiet for a moment. Her lower lip did a thing, a small tightening, and then she controlled it, which was something that shouldn't have to be a skill for a 7-year-old but had become one for her. She'd learned it the hard way, in the months after her mother left, sitting in the back seat of his truck while Owen cried in a gas station parking lot thinking she was asleep. "Promise you'll call me," she said, "every day. Promise you'll come." He put his hands on both sides of her face, the way he always did when he needed her to hear him completely. "Lily, I have never once left you. I am not starting now." She held his eyes for a moment, checking, really checking, the way only she knew how, and then she nodded. He helped her gather the few things she had from the go bag. He put her in Sandra's car. He buckled her seatbelt himself. "Owen," Sandra said quietly, standing beside him at the car door. "How serious is this?" "Serious enough that I'm doing this," he said. She nodded. She was smart enough to not push. "Call me the second you can." "I will." He watched the Civic pull out of the driveway and turn onto the road and get smaller and then disappear around a curve. He stood there for a moment after it was gone, in the cold air of the morning with his hands at his sides. Marcus appeared beside him. "She's safe now. That's one problem handled." "Yeah. So now we figure out what's on that drive." Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive. He looked at it in his palm, the small, ordinary, the kind of thing you'd lose in a junk drawer without thinking twice. Victoria Ashford had died to protect what was on it. Men in black SUVs were running operations in 2 counties to recover it. A man named Blackwood had offered $62,000 for it with one hand and implied violence with the other. "She said flash," Owen said, "right before she went under. Flash and then something, and someone inside." "Could be a name," Marcus said. "Could be a date, could be a phrase." "It could be a lot of things." Marcus turned back toward the house. "Come inside. I've got a laptop. We start trying." Owen closed his hand around the drive and followed him in. They had an hour, maybe less, before Blackwood's people narrowed down their location. They had an encrypted drive with no clear password. They had no money, no legal cover, and no clear idea of what they were up against. What Owen did have was this. A dead woman had trusted him with something at the worst moment of her life, and whatever she'd been trying to protect, it was worth protecting. He didn't know her. He hadn't known anything about her 12 hours ago. But she'd pressed that drive into his hand like it was the last thing she had to give, and that meant something. Outside, somewhere on the road that led into Delmont, a pair of headlights turned in from the highway. Marcus saw them through the window. "They're here," he said. And then Owen heard it, the sound of his house going up on the news feed on Marcus's phone, which was sitting on the kitchen counter with the volume on. He grabbed it. The headline was already there, 30 seconds old. Fire reported at residential property on Millbrook Avenue. Cause unknown. Authorities responding. His house, his home, Lily's drawings on the refrigerator, and the purple crayon under the passenger seat in 4 years of their life built one paycheck at a time. Gone. He put the phone down very carefully. Marcus was already moving toward the back of the house, pulling a jacket off a hook, talking in a low, even voice. "Back door. There's a truck in the barn out back. It's not registered to me. Keys are above the left wheel well. Take it and go north on Carpenter Road, not the highway. I'll deal with the front." "Marcus, go. I can handle a conversation. I can't handle you standing here while they box you in." He looked at Owen with the direct, no-argument look that Owen remembered from the job site. The look that meant the plan was made and discussion time was over. "The drive is the only card you've got. Don't lose it. Figure out what's on it. And Owen," he paused, "don't trust the local cops, not yet. Not until you know who Blackwood has in his pocket." Owen grabbed the go bag. He grabbed the drive. He went out the back door into the cold morning air and ran toward the barn. Behind him, he heard the sound of car doors on the gravel in front of the house. He didn't look back. He found the truck, an old Chevy, dull blue, one dent in the rear quarter panel, and felt above the left wheel well and found the key exactly where Marcus said it would be. He got in. He started it. He pulled out the back of the barn onto the dirt track that led to Carpenter Road and drove north without turning the headlights on until he'd cleared the property line. Then he turned them on, and he drove. He had no home. He had no daughter with him. He had $62,000 he hadn't taken, and a flash drive he couldn't open, and a dead woman's trust in a name, Damian Blackwood, and the beginning of an idea that he hadn't fully shaped yet. The road ahead was empty. The morning was cold and gray and very still. Owen Carter drove north, and he did not stop. Carpenter Road ran north through 30 miles of nothing useful, scrubland and dry creek beds, and the occasional mailbox marking a property too far back from the road to see. Owen drove it with both hands on the wheel and the heater running at full blast because the Chevy's cab was cold in a way that suggested the seals around the doors had given up some years ago. He had maybe half a tank of gas. He had $43 in his wallet. He had the go bag, the flash drive, and Marcus's warning sitting in his head on repeat. Don't trust the local cops. Not yet. Not until you know who Blackwood has in his pocket. He thought about that while he drove. Blackwood had known his phone number within hours of the accident. He'd known about Lily's surgery, about the bench warrant, about the financial specifics of Owen's life in a way that suggested either very fast research or a pre-existing file. He'd had men at Owen's house before sunrise. He'd burned the house down, or had it burned, which was the same thing, within the same morning. That was not a man working alone or improvising. That was a man with infrastructure, with people in multiple places, with the kind of reach that didn't stop at corporate boundaries, which meant anything Owen did that ran through official channels, local police, county sheriff, even state authorities, could potentially land on a desk where Blackwood had a relationship. Maybe not. But maybe was a dangerous word when the stakes were this particular shape. He needed to know what was on the drive before he decided who to trust with it. He pulled off Carpenter Road onto a dirt track that led to a dried-out picnic area, a state park rest stop that had seen better decades, with 2 concrete tables and a rusted grill and a pit toilet that he was hoping he wouldn't need. He parked the Chevy behind a screen of scrub oak and sat with the engine idling and thought about passwords. Marcus had said it would be something she could remember, something meaningful, not random, something she could access under pressure without having to think too hard. He picked up the flash drive and turned it in his fingers. He'd found a USB-C adapter in the go bag. He'd thrown one in months ago for some job site reason he couldn't remember now. And when he plugged the drive into his phone, a prompt came up immediately. Plain white screen, 1 text field, cursor blinking. 1 text field, no hint, no forgot password option, just the box and the cursor and the weight of whatever was behind it. He thought about what she'd said. The order of it. Flash. Something. Don't let them. Someone inside. She'd been trying to give him the password in the same breath as the drive. She'd been coherent enough to know she might not get another chance, so the word she'd started, flash, was either the beginning of the password or a descriptor pointing at something else. And the thing about Victoria Ashford, from the one article he'd read, from the photo, from the 2 sentences she'd managed in the mud, was that she was precise. She was the kind of person who encoded things deliberately. He typed flash drive into the prompt. Incorrect. He tried flash by itself. Incorrect. He sat and thought. Someone inside. An internal betrayal. Someone who had access to her movements, her schedule, her route home on a stormy night on a mountain road. Someone close enough to know exactly when she'd be on Route 9 and exactly how to arrange for the guardrail section to give way under the weight of a car taking a curve too fast. Or maybe the car itself, the brakes, the steering, something quiet and mechanical that would look like driver error in the rain. He typed betrayal. Incorrect. He typed her name. Victoria Ashford. Victoria Ashford. Incorrect each time. He stared at the blinking cursor. The scrub oaks around the car moved in a dry wind, and the morning was very quiet except for the engine noise and his own breathing. He thought about the last thing she'd said before going completely under. Not the password, not the warning. The very last thing, the fragment that had dissolved before she could finish it. She'd said someone in the... and stopped. Someone in the company. Someone on the board. Someone in the building. Someone in the room. He sat up straighter. He typed inside room. Incorrect. He typed the room. Incorrect. He typed room insider. Incorrect. He put the phone down and pressed his fists against his forehead and breathed. He drove another 20 miles north and stopped at a gas station outside a small town called Farwell. He paid cash for the gas, $32, which left him $11, and went inside and bought a bottle of water and used the bathroom and stood in the snack aisle for 3 minutes trying to decide between a granola bar and peanut butter crackers, and ultimately chose the crackers because they had more protein, and he wasn't sure when he'd eat again. The kid behind the counter was maybe 19, earbuds in, watching something on his phone, barely registered Owen's existence. Owen asked him if he had Wi-Fi. "Password's on the receipt," the kid said without looking up. Owen took his receipt and sat in the Chevy in the parking lot and connected to the gas station Wi-Fi and spent 40 minutes reading everything he could find about Victoria Ashford and Ashford Systems. What he found, assembled from press releases and business journalism and one long profile in a technology magazine from 2 years ago, was this. Victoria Ashford had founded Ashford Systems at 24 with a partner named Ross Ellery, who had left the company 18 months later under circumstances the articles described as mutual agreement, and that the technology profile described more candidly as a difficult falling out over the company's direction. Ashford Systems had pivoted hard into defense and cybersecurity contracts, government work, the kind Marcus had mentioned, classified and lucrative. The company had grown fast, taken on major investors, expanded internationally. Revenue was somewhere in the range of $800 million annually, which placed it solidly in the territory of organizations that had more political reach than most people would be comfortable knowing about. Damian Blackwood appeared in the company's history about 3 years ago, hired as COO from a defense consulting firm, with a name that sounded like a law practice, and appeared to have minimal public footprint. His photo in the company's leadership page showed a man in his mid-40s with the kind of face that was handsome in a way that seemed engineered, too symmetrical, too composed, the face of a man who had worked on his presentation the way other people worked on their resumes. Owen read every article he could find about the company's contracts. Most of them were vague in the way that defense journalism is vague when the details are classified. But one article, a piece from a financial news outlet, 8 months old, mentioned an audit. Internal, not public, but referenced in a shareholder communication that someone had leaked to the journalist. The audit concerned irregularities in international subsidiary reporting, which was the kind of language that meant something specific to people who spoke that language and nothing at all to people who didn't. Owen didn't speak that language, But he understood irregularities, and he understood international, and he understood that an audit followed by a CEO dying in a car accident on a mountain road was not a coincidence. He closed the browser and picked up the flash drive again. She'd known about the audit. She'd found something. Found enough to put it on a drive and carry it with her, which meant she didn't trust the company's own servers. She'd been on her way somewhere that night, somewhere important enough to be driving alone in a storm, and Blackwood had known she was going there and had made sure she didn't arrive. Flash. Something. He thought about the profile article, the technology magazine piece. There had been a detail in it, a small one, the kind that fills column inches in a long profile, about Victoria Ashford's background before the company. She'd studied cryptography. She'd done her graduate work at a university in Virginia, some specialized program in information security. She'd been, by all accounts, someone who thought about encryption the way other people thought about language, not as a tool, but as a natural way of expressing things that needed to stay private. Someone who thought like that would choose a password that was meaningful on multiple levels, not just a word she could remember, something that encoded its own meaning. He stared at the drive. Flash drive. Flash. Something. What if it wasn't the beginning of the password? What if Flash was her telling him where to look? Not the password itself, but a pointer. A hint embedded in the handing over. Flash, as in flashpoint, as in a specific moment, as in, he turned it over in his mind, the moment something catches fire. The article about the audit, 8 months ago. The audit that had found irregularities in international subsidiary reporting. He typed flashpoint into the prompt. The screen went white for a moment that lasted long enough to feel like failure. Then it opened. Owen sat in the Chevy in the parking lot of a gas station outside Farwell and looked at what Victoria Ashford had died to protect, and for a long time he didn't move. There were 47 files on the drive. Some were spreadsheets, dense, complex, the kind that required financial expertise to fully parse. Some were PDFs of what appeared to be internal communications, email threads, memos. Some were audio files. And there were 3 video files, each one several minutes long, each one recorded with what appeared to be a phone camera in a conference room setting, the image slightly tilted, the audio clear enough to make out every word. He opened the first video. The conference room was corporate, long table, city view through floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of setting that existed to remind you that serious money was present. 4 people around the table. Owen didn't recognize 3 of them. The 4th, at the head of the table, he recognized immediately from the company website photo. Damian Blackwood, 3 years younger, speaking with the kind of unhurried precision of a man who had prepared his words and trusted them completely. The Meridian pipeline goes through Calder Group, Blackwood said on the video. That's not negotiable, and it's not on paper anywhere. The buyers are offshore, the transfer mechanism is Calder, and the technology is categorized internally as legacy decommission, which means it falls outside the audit scope we agreed to with the board. One of the other men, older, gray-haired, heavy, leaned forward. And the national security classification? Reclassified 12 months ago. I handled that personally through our liaison at DoD. The technology is legally exportable under the current classification. Blackwood paused. But we don't discuss the reclassification, ever, in any format. Owen closed the video. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel and the phone on his thigh and looked at the gas station's dusty front window where a faded beer poster had been there so long it had become architectural. He understood enough. Not everything. Not the specific technology, not all the names, not the full architecture of what they'd built, but enough. They had taken classified defense technology, reclassified it to make the export legal on paper, and sold it through shell companies to overseas buyers. The money had run through something called Calder Group, which he'd seen referenced in at least 2 of the spreadsheets as an international subsidiary. Hundreds of millions of dollars routed through structures designed to look like normal business operations. Victoria Ashford had found it, maybe through the audit, maybe through her own access to the systems. She'd put it on a drive and she'd been taking it somewhere, to the FBI, to a journalist, to a lawyer, to someone, when Blackwood had made sure the road didn't deliver her. And now Owen Carter, who built houses for a living and owed $62,000 in medical bills and drove a truck with a cracked dashboard, had 47 files on a flash drive that could end multiple careers and likely result in federal prison sentences for multiple people. He understood something else too, now that he'd seen the video. The offer Blackwood had made, the medical bills, the money, the clean exit, wasn't generosity. It wasn't even pragmatism. It was the calculation of a man who had already decided what came after. Pay the man, get the drive, wait a suitable interval, and then ensure that Owen Carter couldn't walk back into a federal building and describe the phone call where he'd been offered money to hand over evidence. The drive was the only thing keeping Owen alive, because without it, he was just a construction worker with a dead woman's testimony about a flash drive, which was nothing. With it, he was a problem that couldn't be solved with a check. He needed to make copies, that was first. Before anything else, before he called anyone or went anywhere, he needed duplicates of everything on that drive in places Blackwood couldn't find or control. He didn't have a laptop. He didn't have a second drive. What he had was his phone and a gas station Wi-Fi and 47 files. He spent the next 2 hours doing the most painstaking thing he'd done since the night Lily was born, which had required a different kind of sustained terror. He uploaded every file from the drive to 3 different places. A free cloud storage account he created with a new email address, a second cloud service under a different account, and he emailed the largest files to Sandra's personal email with a subject line that said, "Do not open, do not delete, do not tell anyone. I'll explain." He felt bad about that last one, but Sandra was careful, and she was smart, and she would follow those instructions because she trusted him, or at least trusted that he wouldn't contact her with something like this for no reason. When he was done, he had backups in 3 places and the original drive still in his pocket. His phone battery was at 11%. He plugged it into the car charger. The Chevy had one, an old adapter type, the cord held together by electrical tape, and let it charge while he sat and thought about what to do next. The answer he kept arriving at was the one he didn't like. He needed to make a move that Blackwood didn't see coming, not because Owen was a strategist or a tactician or any kind of player in the world that Blackwood operated in, but because the one advantage Owen had, the only one, was that Blackwood didn't fully understand who he was dealing with. Blackwood had looked at Owen's file and seen a struggling single father with a sick daughter and a bench warrant, and he'd made the calculation that this was a man who could be bought or scared or both. He hadn't considered the possibility that the same qualities that made Owen look weak on paper were the qualities that made him hard to predict. A man with nothing to lose is one thing. A man with one specific thing to protect is another thing entirely. Owen's phone charged to 31%, and then he drove. He found the public library in a town called Kellerman, 40 minutes north of Farwell. Bigger than Farwell, small enough that the library still had a physical bulletin board with local notices and a children's section with carpet that had been there since the 90s. He walked in at 11:15 in the morning looking like what he was, which was a man who hadn't slept and had been through something, and the librarian at the desk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the expression of someone who had seen plenty of difficult mornings walk through that door, looked at him and said, "Computer stations are in the back, free for an hour." "Thank you," Owen said. He sat at a computer station in the back corner and spent 40 minutes going through everything on the drive more carefully, reading the documents he'd skimmed earlier, listening to audio files that turned out to be recordings of phone calls. Short, clipped conversations, never using names directly, but describing transactions in the layered, careful language of people who knew they were discussing something that couldn't be named plainly. What he built, piece by piece, was a picture of something that had taken years to construct and had been running quietly for a long time. Ashford Systems had a legitimate business, the real government contracts, the actual cybersecurity work, the things that appeared in press releases and annual reports. Layered inside that legitimate business was a separate operation managed through a handful of executives that had been selling advanced cyber warfare technology to foreign buyers through intermediary companies that existed primarily as addresses on registration documents. The buyers were in 3 countries, 2 of which were based on Owen's admittedly limited understanding of international relations, not the kind of countries the U.S. government approved of selling advanced cyber warfare technology to. The money involved was not corporate fraud money. It was not embezzlement level money. It was the kind of number that had its own weight. Owen found a spreadsheet that appeared to track cumulative transfers through the Calder Group structure, and the total at the bottom was a number with 10 digits in it. This was why Victoria Ashford was dead. Not because she'd found evidence of someone stealing from the company, because she'd found evidence of something that carried federal charges with words like conspiracy, espionage, and material support attached to them. The people involved weren't facing corporate consequences. They were facing the kind of consequences that required them to ensure no evidence survived. Owen sat back in the library chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about Damian Blackwood. He thought about the phone calls, the smooth voice, the careful language, the shift underneath when Owen had pushed back. He thought about the offer, $62,000, every medical bill, clean exit. He thought about what came after that offer, because there was always an after. Here was what he knew about Blackwood from everything he'd read and heard. The man was methodical. He'd built this operation over years, carefully, with multiple layers of insulation. He didn't move impulsively. Even burning Owen's house down had been a message, a controlled escalation, not a panic move. He was the kind of person who calculated odds and expected the calculation to go his way because the odds had always gone his way. He had not calculated on Owen. Not on Owen specifically, on the type of person Owen was. Blackwood had built his model of Owen from the file, the struggling single father, the bench warrant, the medical bills. He'd seen the pressure points and designed his approach around them. He hadn't considered what happened when someone refused to behave according to their pressure points. Owen needed Blackwood to keep believing he was dealing with the man in the file. The desperate man, the cornered man, the man who was running out of options and would eventually do the rational thing. Because here was the idea that had been forming since he left Marcus's house, since he'd driven north in the cold in a borrowed truck with $11 in his wallet and a dead woman's evidence in his pocket. It had been shaping itself slowly, imperfectly, out of desperation more than strategy. But desperation had its own kind of clarity. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hand over the drive. He wasn't going to wait for federal investigators to somehow find their way to him while Blackwood's people hunted him across 3 counties. He was going to call Blackwood and make him an offer. He used the library's phone, asked the librarian if he could make a local call, and she said sure, and called the number Blackwood had called from that morning, the second unknown number, which he'd memorized because memorizing phone numbers was an old habit from before smartphones, and some habits don't leave. It rang twice. "Mr. Carter?" No surprise. Of course no surprise. "I've been expecting you to call back." "I've been thinking about your offer," Owen said. "And?" "I want more." A pause that was not quite silence. Owen could hear background noise, the sound of an interior space, maybe an office. "Define more." "I want $200,000, cash equivalent, wire transfer. I don't care about the mechanism. I want it in an account I designate before I hand over anything. And I want documentation, something that gives me legal cover, that says I found this drive and cooperated with Ashford Systems' recovery efforts. Something I can show if anyone ever questions why I had it." He heard Blackwood breathe. "That's a significant increase from my previous offer. My house burned down. Factor that in." Another pause. Owen could feel Blackwood thinking on the other end, running his calculation, checking his math, deciding whether the number was worth it. The number, Owen knew, was trivial to Blackwood. The operation on that drive had moved 10 digits through offshore accounts. 200,000 was noise. "When can you deliver it?" Blackwood asked. "I need 48 hours to get somewhere I feel safe. Then we meet somewhere public and I give you the drive." "Where?" "I'll let you know. I'll call this number." "Mr. Carter." Blackwood's voice had recovered its full smoothness, the paint back over the harder thing. "I want to make sure we understand each other. The offer I'm making is contingent on the complete contents of the drive being intact. If anything has been copied or transmitted, nothing has been copied," Owen said. "I've been running from your people for 6 hours. I haven't had time to set up a digital operation." Which was a lie with good timing underneath it, because the copies had been made before he made the call, which meant the lie was technically about what he'd done after the call started. 48 hours, Blackwood said. "I'll have the funds ready." "Good. And Mr. Carter, I'm glad we could get to a practical solution. This was never personal. I know, Owen said. That's the part that bothers me. He hung up and sat for a moment at the librarian's desk. She'd given him privacy without being asked, moved to the other end of the counter, understanding that the call was something she didn't want to know about. He was grateful for that in a way he couldn't have articulated. He thought about the 48 hours. Blackwood would use it to prepare, to set up whatever came after the handover, to position his people, to make sure the transaction went the way he planned. Owen would use it too, but for different things. He went back to the computer station and spent the next hour researching. Not Ashford Systems. He knew enough about that. He was looking for something specific. Who, in the federal system, handled cases involving defense technology, export violations, and financial crimes that crossed international lines. Not local FBI, something higher, something with jurisdiction that didn't run through the local chain where Blackwood might have contacts. What he found, after reading 3 separate case summaries from public court records, was a division of the FBI that handled national security and economic espionage, based out of field offices in 3 cities. Owen picked the one that was farthest from Blackwood's operational footprint, not the nearest, not the most convenient, the one where the local connection was least likely. He found a tip line, a public one, the kind that accepted anonymous information, with a note in the fine print that said physical documents and storage media could be submitted via registered mail with a reference number. He didn't have a printer. He wrote the address down on a scrap of paper from the library's recycling bin, the back of a flyer for a community garden meeting. He pressed the pen hard enough to make sure the ink didn't skip. Then he thought about mailing the drive and felt cold, because mailing the original meant it could be intercepted, lost, delayed. He needed it to arrive. He needed it to arrive at the right place, unopened, with enough context for someone on the other end to understand what they were looking at. He needed to write a letter. He asked the librarian if he could print 2 pages, and she said 20 cents a page, and he found 2 dimes in the bottom of the go bag, left over from a laundromat run sometime in the distant past. And he printed what he'd written. A 1-page letter explaining in plain language who he was, what he'd found, where he'd found it, what was on the drive, and who he believed was responsible. He kept it factual and brief because he didn't trust himself to be eloquent under this kind of pressure, and brevity was harder to dismiss than drama. He included the cloud storage links where the copies lived and the access credentials for both accounts. He addressed an envelope. The library had them for the community outreach mailings, and the librarian gave him one without asking why. And he sealed the drive inside it with the letter and wrote the federal address on the front in the clearest handwriting he could manage, which wasn't saying much because Owen's handwriting had been bad since 3rd grade. He had no money for postage. He had no stamps. He sat with the sealed envelope and this new problem and felt the absurdity of it. The weight of evidence that could end a conspiracy, and the obstacle that was stopping him was 37 cents. He went to the librarian. I have an envelope I need to mail. I don't have stamps. She looked at him over the reading glasses, looked at the envelope, addressed but unstamped, looked back at him. Forever stamps are $1 each for singles from the machine, she said. Then she reached into her desk drawer and produced 2 stamps from a small booklet. First-class envelope needs 2. Heavy package needs more. She looked at the envelope. Looks like a standard envelope. It is. Thank you. I don't have the money right now. I know, she said, and she stuck the stamps on the envelope herself, pressing them down with her thumb, and handed it back to him. He stood there for a second. I'll come back and pay you. Post office is 2 blocks east, she said, and went back to her computer. He mailed it. He stood at the drop box outside the post office on a gray Tuesday morning and held the envelope for a moment. The weight of it, which was almost nothing, an ounce maybe, and thought about Victoria Ashford pressing the flash drive into his jacket pocket in the mud and the rain with a burning car 50 feet away. He dropped it in the slot. He stood there after, hands in his jacket pockets, the empty drive holder in one and the original drive still in the other, and let out a breath that he hadn't realized he'd been holding for approximately 36 hours. The evidence was in 3 places now: the cloud accounts, Sandra's email, and in a federal mail drop addressed to people whose job it was to do something about exactly this kind of thing, with a cover letter that told them where to look and what they'd find. That left the drive in his pocket, which was the card he was playing in 48 hours when he called Blackwood back and gave him a location. He was going to give Blackwood the drive. He was actually going to do it, not as surrender, but as the last piece of a structure that was already built around it. Let Blackwood have the original. Let him believe he'd closed the problem. The copies were made, the letter was in the mail, and what remained was the transaction itself. The $200,000 that Blackwood would transfer because it cost him nothing, and because eliminating Owen afterward was the cleaner solution. Except Owen had no intention of being eliminated afterward, which meant the next 48 hours were about staying alive and in motion long enough for the drive to stop mattering, for the copies to be received and opened and acted on, for the thing Victoria had started to finish in a way that didn't require Owen Carter to be present and alive for it to succeed. He walked back to the Chevy. The morning had turned cold in the way that happens fast in desert elevation, the temperature dropping 15 degrees in under an hour when the cloud cover came in. He sat in the driver's seat and turned the heat on and called Marcus's cell from his own phone, which he knew was risky, but Marcus was the only call he needed to make. Marcus picked up on the first ring. "You good?" Marcus said. "I'm good." "They showed up?" "3 of them. We had a conversation. They left." Owen decided not to ask what the conversation had been like. "I found what's on the drive." "And?" "It's bad. The real kind." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Federal?" "Yeah, I mailed it." "Smart." A pause. "What's next?" Owen told him. The phone call with Blackwood, the 48 hours, the plan that was less a plan than a sequence of moves that he was hoping would hold together long enough to work. Marcus listened without interrupting and then said, "You need somewhere to be for the next 2 days." "I need somewhere they're not looking. There's a motel in Creston, the Mesa View, cash only, no ID required. The guy who runs it has his own reasons for not keeping records. Tell him Ray Webb sent you." "Ray?" "My uncle. Used to stay there when he was working the Eastern Circuit. The owner still remembers him." A pause. "Owen, what are you going to do when you hand it over?" "Run," Owen said. "Fast. That's not a plan. It's the beginning of one." He started the truck. "Thanks for the house, Marcus, for all of it. Buy me a beer when this is over." "I'll buy you several." "Carter." Marcus's voice was level, the way it got when he was about to say something he meant completely. "Watch your back at the handoff. Blackwood's not going to send one guy." "I know." "Make sure you know what you're walking into before you walk into it." "I'm working on that part." He hung up and pulled out of the library parking lot and drove east toward Creston, 40 miles away, with the heater running and the road ahead empty and the drive in his pocket and 48 hours until everything either worked or it didn't. He thought about Lily. He thought about her voice that morning. "Promise you'll come." And the way she'd looked at him before she'd gotten in Sandra's car, checking his eyes for the thing that would tell her whether to worry. He thought about the surgeon's voice reading him that number. $94,000. He thought about the $4,000 in his savings account. He thought about what $200,000 would mean, not just for Lily's surgery, but for what came after, for the recovery, for the physical therapy she'd need, for the years of follow-up that the surgeon had mentioned in the same breath as the procedure cost. Blackwood's money. He was going to take it. He was going to take it and use every dollar of it for exactly the purpose Blackwood had dangled it for, which was saving Lily's life. And the fact that Blackwood intended the money as a transaction that ended with Owen dead was a detail Owen planned to make irrelevant through the application of speed and preparation and the stubborn refusal to cooperate with being anyone's loose end. The Mesa View Motel appeared on the outskirts of Creston like a building that had decided to stop trying. Single story, 12 units, a neon sign that said "Open" with the N burned out. Owen pulled in. A man in his 60s came out of the office before Owen had finished parking, the kind of man who noticed every car that pulled in and decided in the first 3 seconds whether to be welcoming or not. Owen got out and said, "Ray Webb sent me." The man's expression changed from neutral assessment to something warmer. "Ray, haven't heard that name in a while." He looked Owen over, taking in the same inventory everyone had been taking all day. The clothes, the bandaged hand, the absence of luggage beyond a single bag. "Cash?" Cash. 40 a night, room 9. Nobody comes to that side of the building. Owen paid him the last $41 he had. $1 left. He took the key, an actual metal key, not a card, and found room 9 and went inside and sat on the bed in a room that smelled like old carpet, an industrial cleaner, and something floral that was fighting a losing battle against both. He lay back on the bed without taking his shoes off. The ceiling had a water stain in one corner shaped like nothing in particular. He stared at it. Outside, the wind had picked up and was doing something to the motel sign that produced a low, rhythmic creak. He thought about all the ways the next 48 hours could go wrong, which took a while because there were several dozen. Then he stopped thinking about that because it wasn't useful. Instead, he thought about a Tuesday morning 3 years ago, sitting in a hospital waiting room with Lily's diagnosis printout in his hands, and a doctor sitting across from him explaining what spinal stenosis meant for a 4-year-old and what the likely progression was and what could be done and what it would cost. He remembered staring at the number on the estimate and thinking, okay, I'll figure it out. Not because he'd had any idea how, just because there was no other acceptable response. She needed it, so he'd find a way. And he'd kept finding ways one at a time, without any of them being the right size for the problem, but finding them anyway. This was the same thing. Different scale, different stakes, different shape of danger. But the same fundamental calculation. She needed it. He'd find a way. He closed his eyes. He didn't mean to sleep. He had things to plan, moves to think through, the handoff location to choose. But his body had a different agenda, the accumulated deficit of 30-something hours catching up all at once, and he was asleep within 4 minutes, still in his jacket, one hand on the go bag on the bed beside him, the flash drive in his pocket pressing a small hard rectangle into his hip. Outside, the wind moved the sign. The N stayed dark. In a federal mail system somewhere between Kellerman and its destination, an envelope worked its way through the overnight sort. And in a glass and steel office building in a city Owen had never visited, Damian Blackwood sat behind a desk that cost more than Owen's truck and told 2 men across from him exactly where he expected Owen Carter to be in 48 hours. He was wrong about one of those things. He woke up at 4 in the morning with his hand throbbing and the room completely dark, and for about 3 seconds, he didn't know where he was. Then the motel sign's creak reached him through the thin wall, and it came back. Creston, Mesa View, room 9, 48 hours. And he sat up and put his feet on the floor and sat there in the dark for a moment, doing nothing except existing. His hand had bled through the gauze overnight. Not badly, but enough that the bandage needed changing. He went to the bathroom and unwrapped it under the fluorescent light that buzzed and flickered like it was working through something. The cut across his palm had closed but was angry-looking, the edges red, the kind of wound that would heal fine if he left it alone and would become a problem if he didn't. He had a basic first aid kit in the go bag. Antiseptic wipes, fresh gauze, medical tape. He redressed it slowly, working one-handed in the bad light, and when he was done, he stood over the sink and looked at his face in the mirror. He looked like a man who had slept in a motel in his jacket, which was accurate. He had 2 days of stubble and eyes that were rested but not recovered, the kind of eyes that have banked the sleep debt without paying it off. He was 32 years old, and he looked, in this light, a few years older than that. He went back to the bed and sat down and called Sandra on his phone, knowing that each call from this number was a risk and calculating that this one was worth it. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. Owen? Her voice was low. Lily was there, asleep presumably, and Sandra was the kind of person who kept her voice down when a child was sleeping even when she was worried. Are you okay? I'm okay. Is she okay? She's fine. She watched TV until 9 and ate half a pizza and fell asleep on my couch. A pause. Owen, I opened one of the files. He closed his eyes. Sandra, you told me not to, and I know. I opened one, the spreadsheet one at the top. I closed it after about 30 seconds because I understood enough to understand that I didn't want to understand more. Her voice was steady but tight. This is serious. Yeah. How serious? The federal kind. Silence on the line. He could hear her breathing, could almost hear her deciding how scared to be. Are you going to be okay? She asked finally. I'm going to try very hard to be. Keep Lily off social media and away from news, okay? She doesn't need to see anything about a house fire or anything else. She already asked me why your house burned down. Owen's stomach clenched. What did you tell her? I told her there was an electrical problem and that you were handling it. She didn't believe me completely, but she decided to let it go. A pause. She's tougher than you think, Owen. I know she is. She gets it from her mother. He said it without thinking, and then sat with the small ache that followed it. Lily's mother had been tough in her way, just not tough enough for the particular life she'd ended up in. Tell her I called. Tell her I'm okay. She's going to want to talk to you. I'll call again tonight. Real time, not just a message. Okay. Sandra hesitated. The email. The files. If something happens to you, what do I do with them? It was the right question. It was the question he should have answered when he sent them. There's a letter in the envelope I mailed, he said. Federal contact. If you don't hear from me in 4 days, forward everything in that email to the address in the cloud folder. It's in a document called Read First. The login info is in the subject line of the email I sent you, encoded. The number at the beginning is the day I sent it, reversed. You'll figure it out. A pause. You encoded the password in the subject line of an email you sent me. It was 4 a.m, and I was working with what I had. Despite everything, he heard something close to a short exhale of tired amusement. Okay, 4 days. 4 days. Hopefully less. He hung up and sat with the phone in his hands for a moment. Then he put it down and pulled out the legal pad he'd found in the nightstand drawer. Motels always had them, alongside the Gideon material and the laminated room service menu for a restaurant that didn't exist anymore, and started writing. He wrote down everything he knew about Blackwood's operational patterns from the past 48 hours. The timing of the calls, the information they'd had, the speed of the escalation. He wrote down what he knew about the handoff logistics that Blackwood would be planning. Blackwood expected Owen to name a location, which meant Blackwood's team would arrive at that location in advance. They'd want to be there first, to set up, to control the entry and exit points, to make sure the transaction went the way they'd planned rather than the way Owen had planned, which meant Owen couldn't name a location, or rather, he had to name one that Blackwood couldn't pre-position against. He needed somewhere public enough that a team of armed men couldn't operate freely, but not so public that Owen himself became a problem. He needed somewhere he could confirm the wire transfer before handing over anything. He needed somewhere he could exit from multiple directions. He thought for a long time. He wrote and crossed out and wrote again. By 5:30, he had something that was closer to a real plan than anything he'd had so far, which was not the same as a good plan, but was what he had. He set the legal pad down and called Marcus. Marcus answered like he hadn't been sleeping. Owen suspected this was genuine, that Marcus had been running his own calculations through the night. I need a favor, Owen said. Another one. I need someone who isn't me to do something on the day of the handoff. I need a body, a physical presence at a location, someone Blackwood's people will follow and watch and waste time on. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You need a decoy. I need Blackwood's team to be in 2 places at once, which means they can't be fully committed to either. What's the location? Owen told him. He'd picked a truck stop diner on Route 7 about 60 miles from where he actually intended to do the handoff. Busy, with a parking lot that could absorb multiple vehicles without looking wrong, with enough civilian traffic that Blackwood's people would have to be careful. Marcus would go there, sit at the counter, drink coffee, be visible, be, from a distance, a man meeting someone who is taking his time arriving. They're going to make me as not you pretty fast, Marcus said. I know. But by the time they do, I need the wire to be confirmed and the drive to be handed over and me to be somewhere else. Where are you actually doing it? Owen told him that too. Marcus thought about it. That works, he said. It's weird enough that they won't expect it. That's the goal. Owen, a pause. The wire transfer. Once you confirm it, you hand over the drive. Then what? Then I move. Fast. They're going to come after you, transfer or no transfer, once they have the drive and they know you've seen what's on it. They don't know I've seen what's on it. They think I've been running. They think I'm a desperate guy who found a drive he can't open and wants to sell it. Do they? Owen thought about the phone call, the thing he'd said to Blackwood. That's the part that bothers me. And the pause that had followed it. Maybe. Maybe Blackwood had registered that as more than a reflex. Maybe he'd filed it somewhere. Probably not completely, Owen admitted, but probably enough. And after you hand it over, after you're moving, then I'm a construction worker with a sick kid and no home. I'm not a threat. The drive is gone, they have what they want, and going after me creates more exposure than leaving me alone. That's optimistic. It's what I've got. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The sound of early morning on his end, a bird maybe, and a vehicle somewhere distant. Then, okay, I'll be at the truck stop at noon. How will I know if you've got the money? I'll text you. One word. If it's clear, get up and leave. If it's anything else, don't. What's the anything else? There won't be an anything else, Owen said, which was not an answer, but was the best he could offer. Gitget. He spent the morning at the motel doing two things, sleeping another 3 hours, which his body demanded and got, and then going through the files on the drive one more time. This time, not looking for the full picture, but for the specific details he'd need for the conversation with Blackwood. Not to use them then. Not to tip his hand. Just to have them, the way you carry an extra tool on a job site. Not because you expect to need it, but because the jobs where you need it are the jobs where not having it matters. He found 3 things that he hadn't focused on the night before. The first was a name. In one of the audio recordings, the third one, the longest, a voice he didn't recognize referred to someone called our contact at the field office, in the context of making sure a particular investigation didn't move forward. Field office was FBI. Their contact. Blackwood had someone. Owen didn't know who, and he didn't need to. What it confirmed was that Marcus's warning had been accurate, and that any approach through standard channels carried the risk of landing on the wrong desk. The second thing was a date. The Calder Group transfers had a pattern. They ran on the last business day of every quarter, routed through a series of accounts that changed each time, the structure of the routing varying, but the timing consistent. The next last business day of the quarter was in 11 days. Whatever Blackwood's people had planned, they had an operational deadline that wasn't just about the drive. The drive was the immediate problem. The bigger problem was the next transfer, which would happen regardless, and which, if the federal investigators received the drive's contents in time, they could potentially intercept. The third thing was simpler. In one of the PDF files, an internal memo, 3 pages, dense, there was a reference to a meeting location, a property Blackwood used for what the memo described as off-campus discussions, an address in a place called Mineral Springs, which Owen looked up on the Motel TV's browser function and found was a small community about 90 miles east of the city where Ashford Systems was headquartered. A private property, gated, the kind of place where conversations happened that weren't meant to be overheard. He wrote the address down. He didn't know yet why he was writing it down. He just did. Amt. At noon, he called the number he had for Blackwood. The phone rang 4 times, which was 2 more than it had ever rung before, and Owen felt the first tick of something that might have been doubt before Blackwood picked up. Mr. Carter, slightly less smooth than usual, something underneath working harder. I'm ready to move on this, Owen said. I want to do the exchange today. A pause. Today? You said 48 hours. I've been sleeping in a budget motel and eating gas station crackers for 2 days. I want this done. I want the money, and I want to go somewhere and take care of my daughter. He kept his voice flat. Tired, which wasn't hard because he was tired, and slightly irritated, which wasn't hard either. Today, 3 o'clock. That's short notice. The offer doesn't expire. You either want the drive or you don't. Another pause, longer. Owen could feel Blackwood working through it. The recalculation, the redeployment of resources. The question of whether this sudden urgency was authentic desperation or something else. He was betting on Blackwood concluding it was desperation. Desperate people rushed, Desperate people made small decisions for emotional reasons. Desperate people were manageable. Where? Blackwood said. Owen told him. The Kellerman County Courthouse was a building that had been many things in its life: a functioning courthouse, then a records annex, then a community services office, and was now in the process of being renovated into something new, a process that had been ongoing for about 14 months, according to the construction notices posted on the chain-link fence that surrounded the work area. The work was happening on the south side of the building. The north entrance was still accessible and led into a public lobby. Marble floors, benches, a security desk that was staffed during business hours by one guard named, according to the little placard, Dennis, who was 60 and read paperback thrillers and would look up if you spoke to him and look back down shortly after. Owen knew this because he'd driven past it 4 times in the past hour, circling, reading it, checking it the way you check a job site before you start work, looking for what's there and what isn't, what the sight lines are, where the exits run. He parked the Chevy on the street 2 blocks north and walked to the courthouse at 2:45. He went through the north entrance, nodded to Dennis, and sat on one of the benches in the lobby where he could see the door and be seen from it, with the corridor that led to the building's rear exit at his back. At 2:58, Blackwood walked in. Owen had not expected Blackwood himself. He'd expected an intermediary, someone to take the drive and transfer the funds remotely, a buffer between Blackwood and the transaction. The fact that Blackwood had come personally told Owen something, though he wasn't sure yet what. Blackwood was the man from the company website photo, but more so, taller than Owen had visualized from the voice alone, with the kind of physical presence that came from knowing you were usually the most powerful person in any given space. He wore a coat that cost more than Owen's truck. He walked like someone whose time was precisely managed. He was alone, or appeared to be. Owen kept his eyes on the door behind Blackwood as he approached, and saw no one follow him in, which didn't mean no one was outside. Blackwood sat on the bench opposite Owen. He looked at Owen the way you look at something you've been calculating from a distance and are now measuring directly. "You look like you've had a hard week," Blackwood said. "I have," Owen said. "You burned my house down." Blackwood's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Okay." They looked at each other for a moment. Dennis turned a page at his desk. "The account," Owen said. Blackwood took out his phone, turned it to show Owen a screen, a banking interface, a transfer form, already populated. The amount was $200,000. The destination field was empty. "Give me the account information," Blackwood said. Owen had opened a new account that morning, online, through a bank he'd never used. A digital bank that didn't require branch visits and had a routing and account number available immediately. He'd put the account information on a scrap of paper in his shirt pocket. He took it out and handed it to Blackwood without touching Blackwood's phone. Blackwood looked at the paper, typed the numbers into his phone, looked up. "This is a personal checking account." "Yeah. Usually people use something more. I'm a construction worker," Owen said. "That's what I've got. Does it work for the transfer?" "It works?" Blackwood held the phone so Owen could see the screen again. "Confirm the amount." $200,000. Owen looked at it, thought about Lily's surgery, thought about the surgeon's voice reading him the estimate like a sentence, thought about a number that had been impossible 6 days ago. "Transfer it," Owen said. Blackwood pressed the button. The confirmation appeared, pending, then processing. Owen looked at it and took a breath he tried to make invisible. He pulled out his own phone and opened the banking app he'd set up that morning and watched the screen. 40 seconds, 50. Dennis turned another page. The notification appeared. Incoming transfer, $200,000. Processing, estimated availability. "It's pending," Owen said. "Wire transfers process within minutes," Blackwood said. "You'll have confirmation shortly." Owen watched the app. Blackwood sat across from him with his hands folded and his expression composed, and Owen had the sensation he'd had once on a job site when a foundation wall had started to lean, the particular quality of stillness right before something big moves. The confirmation came through. Owen looked at it twice. Available balance, $200,000. He put the phone in his pocket. He reached into his other pocket and took out the flash drive and put it on the bench between them. Blackwood looked at it. Then he picked it up, looked at it front and back, and put it in his coat pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said, with the smoothness fully restored. "I hope Lily's surgery goes well." Owen looked at him. "I'm sure it will." Blackwood stood. He looked down at Owen with the expression of a man closing a transaction. Polite, final, slightly remote, the look of someone who has already moved on to the next item on the list. "Take care of yourself." He walked to the door, pushed it open, was gone. Owen sat on the bench. Dennis turned a page. The marble floor reflected the overhead lights in a way that was slightly uneven, the old stone worn in paths where decades of people had walked. Owen picked up his phone and sent Marcus a text. One word, clear. Then he stood up and walked to the corridor that led to the rear exit. What? He came out the back of the courthouse into a service alley that ran between the building and a parking structure and walked north through it to where it opened onto a side street and crossed the side street and kept walking. He didn't run. Running looked like running. He walked like a man who had somewhere to be and knew how to get there and had nothing specific to hide from. 2 blocks north, 1 block east. Into the parking garage where he'd moved the Chevy that morning, 3 levels up, away from the street-level cameras that he'd clocked on his earlier loops. He got in the truck and sat for a moment. His hands were shaking, not much, just enough to notice when he put them on the steering wheel. He gripped the wheel and waited for them to stop, and they did, mostly. He pulled out of the parking structure and drove. He drove for 20 minutes before he called Sandra, and when she picked up, he said, "I'm out." "Oh, thank God," she said, and he could hear in her voice 3 days of held together breaking loose in about 4 words. "I'm okay. Is Lily up?" "She's been up for an hour. She's been asking to call you since 7. Put her on." There was a rustling, a brief exchange he couldn't quite hear, and then Lily's voice, "Dad." "Hey, kid. Are you done?" He almost laughed. 7 years old, and she'd distilled the entire situation into those 3 words with the precision of someone who understood that the details were for later, and the important question was whether it was over. "Yeah," he said. "I'm done." "Are you coming here?" "I'm driving right now, a few hours." "Okay." A pause. He heard her breathe. "Your voice sounds different." "How?" "Less like you're trying to sound normal." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it does." He kept driving. He had $200,000 in a digital account and no home, and a truck that wasn't registered to him, and he was driving toward his daughter, which was the only direction he knew how to go. He tried not to think about what came next. He'd been so focused on the mechanics of the handoff that the after had remained theoretical, and now that it was no longer theoretical, it was also slightly overwhelming. He needed a place to stay, not permanently, just somewhere stable enough to book Lily's surgery, to talk to the doctor, to begin the process of rebuilding something that could be called a life. He needed to deal with the bench warrant, which could now be dealt with because he had money to pay the fines. He needed a new phone eventually, a new plan, a new address for all the things that required addresses. The list was long. He let it be long and drove through it without trying to solve all of it at once. He called Sandra back an hour later. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask?" "Can we stay with you for a while, me and Lily, until I can get something set up?" Sandra was quiet for a moment. "I have a guest room," she said. "It has a twin bed and some boxes I haven't unpacked since 2019, but we can move them." "I'll move them." "Owen," she paused. "What happens now with the thing you were dealing with?" "I sent the information to the right people before the handoff. The copies are out there. There's nothing left for Blackwood to suppress." He said it steadily, factually, the way you state something you've already thought through completely. "The people I sent it to do this for a living. It's not in my hands anymore." "You're sure?" "I'm sure about the evidence. I'm not sure about the timing or what they'll do with it." He paused. "But I'm not the one carrying it anymore." "Okay," Sandra said. "Okay. Come here. We'll figure the rest out." He drove for another hour. The landscape changed, the open scrubland giving way to the edge of something more suburban, more clustered. the kind of zone between towns where gas stations and chain restaurants appear before the density builds. He stopped for gas and paid at the pump with his phone. The bank app worked, which was still slightly surreal, and went inside and bought a sandwich and a bottle of orange juice and ate both in the parking lot. His phone rang. Unknown number, different from Blackwood's numbers. He stared at it for 2 rings, then answered. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice. Measured, professional, the kind of voice that carried institutional weight without announcing it. "My name is Agent Carla Reyes. I'm with the FBI's National Security Division. I received an envelope this morning." Owen stopped chewing. "I've read the letter," she said, "and I want you to know that it arrived at the right place. We've already initiated a preliminary review of the materials referenced in your communication." A pause. "I'd like to speak with you in person, at your convenience and with whatever arrangements make you comfortable." He found his voice. "How did you get my number?" "The letter included your name, the number we obtained through standard investigative process. I want to be clear. You're not in any legal jeopardy in connection with this material. You found evidence and you reported it. That's the right thing." He sat in the parking lot with a half-eaten sandwich in his hand and let that land. "The drive itself," he said. "I gave it to Blackwood." "We know. We were watching the courthouse." A beat. "We've had eyes on Damian Blackwood for approximately 4 months, Mr. Carter. Victoria Ashford's death accelerated our timeline considerably. What you provided gives us something we've been trying to build for a long time." Owen looked out the windshield. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan 2 spots over. A kid in the cart was waving a cracker at something only he could see. "He's going to know the copies exist," Owen said. "Once things start moving." "Yes, which is why I'd like to move quickly, and why it's important that you and your daughter are somewhere stable and documented for the next few days. Not for your safety specifically. At this point, Blackwood moving against you would be an extraordinarily bad calculation on his part, but for the legal process. We'll need a formal statement." "I can do that." "Good. Where are you now?" He told her roughly. She gave him a field office address. Not the local one, a different city, the one Owen had addressed the envelope to, and said someone would meet him there whenever he arrived, that there was no rush, that he should take care of his daughter first. "Mr. Carter," she said before hanging up, "the materials you sent, the video recording specifically." A brief pause. "They're going to matter. I want you to know that." He didn't know what to say to that. "Okay," he said. "Thank you for not throwing the drive away." She hung up. Owen sat in the parking lot for a long moment. Then he finished his sandwich. He got back on the road. He arrived at Sandra's place in Barron's Point at 4:17 in the afternoon. It was a small house on a quiet street with a bird feeder in the front yard and a welcome mat that said home in block letters, the kind of mat that was either sincere or ironic, and in Sandra's case was probably both. He didn't even have his hand on the door handle before Lily came out of the house. She was in her socks, no shoes, which meant she'd seen the truck through the window and hadn't stopped for shoes, and she came down the front steps at a speed that made Owen get out of the truck fast, because his brain immediately ran the calculation of Lily moving fast, plus Lily's legs doing the thing, and the concrete step at the bottom. She made it fine. She got both feet on the ground, and then she was running across the small patch of front lawn, and Owen crouched down and caught her, and she hit him at full 7-year-old velocity and locked her arms around his neck and held on. He held on too. Tighter than he meant to, probably. She didn't complain. "I knew you'd come," she said into his shoulder. "I said I would." "I know, but I knew before you said it." He pulled back enough to look at her face. She looked fine, tired around the eyes in the way she got when she'd been worrying, which she did quietly and without announcing it, the same way he did. She had a small purple marker stain on her left hand, which meant she'd been drawing. "Your socks are going to be wet," he said. She looked down at the grass. "Yeah," looked back up. "I don't care." Sandra was in the doorway. She looked at Owen with an expression that was mostly relief and a little bit something else. The residue of 3 days of being afraid for someone she didn't have a formal category for anymore. Not sister-in-law, not quite friend. Something that had persisted beyond the legal connection. "There's food," she said. "Real food. Come inside." He stood up, keeping one hand on Lily's shoulder, and walked up to the house. Enquête. The next 3 days happened slowly, which was what he needed. He slept. Not the desperate, snatched sleep of the motels and the borrowed truck, but actual sleep, in a room with a door that closed and a window that showed a quiet street and no alarm set, because Sandra had told him firmly that nobody was setting alarms. He slept 9 hours the first night and woke up feeling scraped out in a way that sleep had gotten to the bottom of. His hand healed. He ate real meals. Lily had been enrolled in Sandra's neighborhood school for a few days, temporarily, just to give her something structured, and she went without complaint and came back each afternoon with the specific fatigue of a child who has been performing normalcy all day and is ready to stop. Owen helped her with homework after dinner. It was fractions. She was annoyed by fractions. He was not, it turned out, significantly better at fractions than she was, which she found both funny and alarming. "You're a dad," she said. "Dads are supposed to know fractions." "I do floors and walls, not fractions." "Then how do you measure stuff?" "Differently," he said, which she accepted reluctantly. On the second day, he called the surgeon's office. Dr. Amara Singh, the spinal specialist, who had walked Owen through the procedure 18 months ago and had been patient with his follow-up calls ever since. The receptionist put him through when he said his name. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Singh said, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I have the money," Owen said. "For Lily's surgery? I want to schedule it." A pause. "All of it?" "All of it. I can put a deposit down today, if that's how it works." Another pause, longer, the kind that comes from recalibrating. "We can schedule a pre-op consultation first. I'd want to do updated imaging before we confirm the surgical date. It's been a while since the last scan, and I want current data. But yes, we can move forward." "How soon?" "If the imaging looks like what I expect it to look like, we could potentially have her in surgery within the month." Owen looked at the wall of Sandra's guest room and felt something in his chest do something complicated. A month. After a year and a half of the number being impossible, after all the math that never added up, after Lily's legs doing the thing and the parking lot fall and the 3 times at school, a month. "Schedule the consultation," he said, "as soon as you have an opening." He hung up. He sat on the edge of the guest room bed and looked at the boxes in the corner that he'd promised Sandra he'd move and hadn't gotten to yet, and he was quiet for a while. He went to the FBI field office on the 3rd day. Sandra drove him. He'd returned Marcus's Chevy, had Marcus pick it up from Barron's Point with a handshake and no ceremony, which was exactly the right amount of ceremony for what Marcus had done. He and Sandra drove the 3 hours to the field office in her Civic, while Lily stayed with Sandra's neighbor, a retired teacher who reminded Owen so much of Mrs. Pacheco that he found it briefly disorienting. Agent Reyes was a woman in her early 40s, gray at the temples, with the manner of someone who had spent 20 years listening to accounts of what people did when they were scared and had learned to make that feel like ordinary work. She sat across from Owen in a conference room and asked him to go through everything from the beginning, from the moment he'd seen the gap in the guardrail to the moment he'd walked out of the courthouse. He talked for 2.5 hours. He didn't editorialize. He didn't explain his choices beyond the facts of what he'd done. She took notes on a legal pad and asked follow-up questions that were specific and precise and never once made him feel like he was being doubted or managed. When he finished, she set her pen down. "I want to update you on where things stand," she said. "Given your cooperation and given the nature of the materials, I think you deserve to know what you're involved in." "Okay." "We executed search warrants on Ashford Systems headquarters and 2 subsidiary offices this morning." She said it evenly, matter-of-factly, like it was a logistical update rather than the kind of thing Owen had been trying to imagine. "We also seized records from the Calder Group entities. Damian Blackwood was taken into federal custody at 6 a.m. Owen looked at her. "This morning?" "Yes." He thought about the courthouse. 3 days ago. Blackwood walking out the door with the drive in his coat pocket, smooth and composed, already moving on to the next item. 3 days between that moment and this one. "He thought he'd closed it," Owen said. "He did think that, which is why he was at his office this morning rather than somewhere less accessible." Agent Reyes looked at him steadily. The video recordings were particularly significant. We had financial evidence that was strong but required significant forensic work to make usable. The recordings gave us conversations that were explicit enough to proceed without that work. Victoria recorded them. Yes. From what we can piece together, she'd been building the case for approximately 6 months before her death. The drive was the culmination of that work. She paused. She was careful, and she was thorough. We're treating her as a material whistleblower, which carries specific protections and, in this case, means her estate will be recognized as part of the civil recovery process. Owen thought about her in the mud and the rain, her hand finding his wrist, the deliberate act of pressing the drive into his pocket before she went under. 6 months of careful, patient work, and the last thing she'd done with it was hand it to a stranger, because the stranger was the only option available. "Mr. Carter," Agent Reyes looked at him with the directness of someone who didn't perform warmth but felt it. "What you did. Carrying that drive, making the copies, mailing the envelope, none of it was your responsibility. You didn't ask to be in that ravine. You didn't ask for any of this." She paused. "But the way you handled it mattered. The fact that you chose to protect the evidence rather than just protect yourself, that made a significant difference to this case." Owen looked at the table. "I thought about handing it over," he said. "Early on, when he called and offered the money, I thought about it for a while." "That's honest." "I thought about Lily, about the surgery, about what that money meant." He looked up. "I thought about it seriously." "I know," she said. "Most people would have." He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. It was enough that she knew. Boom. On the drive back to Barron's Point, Sandra drove and the radio played something quiet, and the late afternoon light came in sideways through the windows the way it does in early spring, that specific yellow that doesn't quite commit to warmth but gestures toward it. "Well," Sandra said, after they'd been driving for a while. "They arrested Blackwood this morning," Owen said. Sandra's hands tightened slightly on the wheel and then relaxed. "Is it over?" "The FBI part is starting. The legal part will take longer." He thought about what Agent Reyes had said. The trials, the civil proceedings, the months of process. "But the part where I'm running is over." Sandra nodded. She drove. The light came in through the window. "I need to find somewhere to live," Owen said. "Me and Lily. I can't stay at your place forever." "You've been there 3 days." "I know, but I'm already thinking about it." "Think about it next week. Or the week after." She glanced at him briefly, then back at the road. "There's time now, Owen. That's the thing. You have time." He looked out the passenger window at a landscape that was ordinary and specific and real. A barn set back from the road, a water tower painted with the name of a town he'd never been to, a field running to the horizon under a sky that was doing the transition from day to evening, the blue deepening at the edges. $200,000, surgery scheduled for 6 weeks out. Blackwood in federal custody. The drive in the possession of the right people. And Lily at Sandra's neighbor's house doing who knows what, probably drawing something, probably asking questions that were too large for a 7-year-old, and asking them anyway because that was what she did. He'd call the surgeon's office again tomorrow to confirm the consultation. He'd deal with the bench warrant this week. Simple now, just fines, straightforward. He'd find a place to rent in the right school district, somewhere with a yard if possible, something Lily could orient around. He'd rebuild the list of things they owned, which was short, currently. The Purple Crayon was gone, lost with the house, assuming it hadn't burned, which it probably had. He'd buy another one, multiple, probably. They made purple crayons in bulk. Sandra turned the radio up slightly. Nothing important, just something with a guitar in it, easy, the kind of music that doesn't need to be listened to carefully. Owen let it be background. He watched the field run to the horizon. He thought about Victoria Ashford on the mountain road, in the rain, with the burning car and the mud, and the decision she'd made in what might have been her last conscious moment. Press the drive into the stranger's hand and hope. Hope that the stranger was the right kind of person. Hope that something she'd spent 6 months building wouldn't die with her. She hadn't known Owen Carter. She'd had no way to know what kind of person he was. She'd just done the only thing left to do, and it had landed where it needed to land. He thought that was worth something, Not a lesson, not a meaning, not a message, just a fact about what people do when they're up against it and they still choose to try. The field ended. A town appeared at the road's edge, small and lit up in the early dark, windows yellow and specific, life happening inside them. They drove through it and out the other side, toward Barron's Point, toward Lily. The consultation with Dr. Singh happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Owen arrived at Sandra's house with nothing except a go bag and a digital bank balance that still felt unreal when he checked it. The imaging center was attached to the hospital on the north side of Barron's Point, a large, slightly impersonal building with good parking and a children's waiting area that had been decorated by someone who understood that kids in medical situations needed something to look at that wasn't walls. Lily sat in a chair next to Owen while they waited for her name to be called, looking at a book she'd brought from Sandra's shelf, a story about a girl who trained horses, which she'd been reading for the past week and discussing in detail whether or not the horse training techniques described were realistic, a judgment she was forming based on no prior knowledge of horses but considerable confidence in her own assessment. "I think the author never actually trained a horse," she said. "Maybe not," Owen said. "You can tell. The horse does exactly what she wants too fast. Real things don't do that." Owen looked at her. "How do you know about real things?" She turned a page. "Because I know things." He almost smiled. She was right, actually. She did know things, the specific category of things that came from paying close attention to the world around her rather than from being told. She'd always been that way, even as a small kid, even when her mother was still around, and the house had been full of adult chaos that Lily had watched from the middle of it with those dark, evaluating eyes. Her name was called. She put the book down carefully, marking her page with a library receipt she'd been using as a bookmark, and stood up and went without being asked, which was how she always did medical things. Straightforwardly, without drama, the way she'd decided to approach the unfair parts of her life a long time ago and had stuck with ever since. Owen followed her in. Dr. Singh was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular patience of a specialist who had spent decades delivering information that changed the shape of families' lives and had learned to do it in a way that was honest without being cruel. She'd seen Lily 3 times before. She greeted Lily by name and asked about school, and Lily answered in the direct, factual way she had, and Dr. Singh listened like the answer mattered, which Owen had always appreciated about her. The imaging took 40 minutes. Owen sat in the waiting room and did not look at his phone and did not think about specific outcomes, and did a reasonable job of both. When they came back out and sat in Dr. Singh's office, and she pulled up the scans on the screen, she said, "The narrowing has progressed since the last scan, which is consistent with what I expected, but it confirms that the timing is right. Waiting longer would make the procedure more complex." She looked at Lily, then at Owen. "I want to schedule surgery for 4 weeks from today, if that works for your family." 4 weeks. Owen heard the number and felt it settle somewhere in his chest like something being set down after a long carry. "That works," he said. "I want to talk through the procedure again, the recovery timeline, what to expect." "Yes, please." Dr. Singh talked for 20 minutes. Owen listened to all of it and asked 2 questions that he'd had for a while and hadn't been able to ask before because asking them felt like assuming something he couldn't yet afford to assume. She answered them clearly and without hedging more than the medical reality required, which was the right amount. Lily listened too. Lily asked one question of her own, directed at Dr. Singh with the same directness she applied to everything. "Will my legs stop doing the thing after?" Dr. Singh looked at her. "That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. The procedure relieves the pressure that causes your legs to give out. Most patients see significant improvement. I can't promise you a specific outcome, but that is the goal." Lily nodded. She looked at the scan on the screen for a moment, the image of her own spine, which she'd seen versions of before and regarded with the calm interest of someone studying a map of a place they lived in. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." Dr. Singh looked at Owen over Lily's head with an expression that was brief and said something without words about the particular quality of this child, and Owen received it and looked back at his daughter and thought, "Yeah, I know." "Samastin," He paid the surgical deposit from the bank account that morning, the same account that held what remained of Blackwood's $200,000 after the first round of medical fees and the 3 months of prepaid rent on the apartment he'd just signed for in a neighborhood 20 minutes from Barron's Point that had a decent elementary school and a park within walking distance and a second bedroom that was small but had a window that faced east, which Lily had decided was the important variable. East means morning light, she'd explained during the apartment tour, standing in the small bedroom doorway with the evaluative eye of a real estate professional. I like morning light. The landlord, a man named Victor, who seemed genuinely charmed by her, had asked her what else she looked for in a room. Closet space, she said, and no carpet. Carpet is harder to keep clean. Victor had looked at Owen. Owen had shrugged. Victor had given them the apartment. The move-in was scheduled for the following weekend. Sandra had already started collecting boxes from the liquor store down the street, the way people do when someone in their life is moving, showing up with boxes that still smelled faintly of whatever had been in them and stacking them in the corner of the guest room as a kind of practical "I'll miss you." Owen was buying new things slowly, deliberately. A bed for Lily. She'd chosen it herself. A platform bed with a trundle underneath for when she had a friend sleep over, which had not happened yet but which she was apparently planning for. A small table and 2 chairs. A second-hand couch from a place on Route 12 that Sandra had found online, green, slightly worn on one arm, which Lily had declared acceptable. A set of dishes, plain white, the kind that could survive being dropped by a 7-year-old who sometimes carried things before she was fully awake. He'd bought a box of crayons. The big box, 64 colors, which was more crayons than either of them needed but felt right. Lily had immediately inventoried them and reported that there were 3 different shades of purple, which she considered excessive but not unwelcome. The purple crayon from under the truck seat was gone, of course, along with everything else that had been in the house. There were things he found himself reaching for and not finding. A particular coffee mug, a toolbox that had been his father's, Lily's drawings that had been on the refrigerator, and each time was its own small loss, too small to grieve directly and too specific to let go of without noticing. But the thing about losing everything, Owen was finding, was that it clarified what mattered, not in the easy, inspirational sense, in the practical sense. When you had to rebuild from nothing, you made choices about what you rebuilt first, and those choices told you something true about what you actually needed versus what you'd just accumulated. What he'd rebuilt first, Lily's room, her books, her art supplies, a routine that involved dinner at the table and homework after, and some form of outdoor time before it got dark. That was the foundation. Everything else was negotiation. Doubt. The federal case moved with a speed that Agent Reyes had described as unusual, and that Owen, who had no baseline for how federal cases moved, simply accepted as the pace at which these things happened. Reyes called him once a week, sometimes twice, with updates that were as much as she could share without compromising the investigation. Blackwood had been arraigned. 3 other Ashford Systems executives had been charged alongside him. The gray-haired man from the conference room video was one of them, a man named Gerald Prout, who had been the company's CFO for 8 years. The Calder Group entities were in the process of being unwound by forensic accountants, which Reyes said with the particular satisfaction of someone who found forensic accounting genuinely interesting, and Owen took her word for it. The technology that had been sold, the cyber warfare systems, was a more complicated part of the case, involving agencies whose names Reyes didn't always use, and conversations that happened in places Owen was not part of and wouldn't be. What he understood was that the buyers overseas had received systems that were now known to be compromised, which was the kind of outcome that sounded like a win, and probably was one, in the specific language of whatever world those conversations happened in. Victoria Ashford's estate, managed by a trust that she'd established some years before her death, according to Reyes, had retained its own counsel and was cooperating fully with the investigation. The estate's cooperation and Owen's cooperation were separate tracks that occasionally ran parallel. Her estate stood to recover a portion of the misappropriated funds through the civil process. Owen was not a party to that and didn't want to be. He had one formal interaction with the estate's legal team, a phone call, 30 minutes, with a lawyer named Hendricks who was professional and efficient and thanked Owen for his role in preserving the evidence and asked him 3 specific questions about the night of the accident and thanked him again. That was it. He didn't attend hearings, he didn't issue statements. His formal involvement was the deposition he'd given to the FBI, the phone call with Hendricks, and the ongoing availability he'd promised Reyes if additional questions arose. He did not become a news story. He was mentioned in some coverage, construction worker, Good Samaritan, unnamed in most reports because he'd requested it, and Reyes had honored that. And in one longer piece in a national publication that was focused on Victoria Ashford's work and described Owen as a witness who preserved critical evidence under significant personal risk. He read that sentence once and then closed the article because reading about yourself in the past tense while you were still very much in the present tense was a peculiar experience he didn't need to repeat. What he was, mostly, was a man trying to get his life back into a shape he recognized. Marcus came to the new apartment the day after they moved in, arriving with a 6-pack of beer and no notice, which was exactly how Owen would have wanted it if he'd been asked. They sat on the slightly worn green couch while Lily was at Sandra's and drank 2 beers each and talked about the job market and the specific injustice of lumber prices and whether Owen should go back to framing or try for project management, which paid better and involved less of being outside in bad weather. "You could manage," Marcus said. "You think like a manager. You just don't like asking people to do things." "I don't like asking people to do things I could do myself. That's a management problem. It's a personality problem." Marcus looked around the apartment, the new furniture, the sparse walls, the beginnings of something rather than the fullness of something. "It's a good place," he said. "Clean bones." "Lily likes the morning light in her room." "Of course she does." Marcus took a drink. "She doing okay?" "Surgery's in 3 weeks. You know how she is, matter of fact about it. She asked the surgeon practical questions. She's been reading about spinal procedures online, which I'm not sure is healthy, but I'm also not sure how to stop it." Marcus almost smiled. "She's going to be fine." "She's going to be fine," Owen agreed. They sat with that for a moment. The beer was cold and the couch was comfortable in the broken-in way second-hand things are comfortable, and the apartment was quiet in the new way that apartments are quiet before they've accumulated enough of a life to give silence a context. "I never asked you," Owen said. "What happened when they showed up at your place in Delmont?" Marcus turned his beer in his hands. "Had a conversation." "What kind?" The kind where they wanted information, and I wanted them to leave." He paused. "I know how to talk to people who are used to intimidating people. You just have to not be interested in what they're selling. They sell fear, mostly. If you're not buying, they've got nothing." It was a conversation," Marcus said firmly, which meant that was the end of that particular line of inquiry. "I've had worse." Owen let it go. He owed Marcus a debt that wasn't payable in beer, and Marcus knew it, and neither of them was going to say it out loud because that wasn't how either of them operated. It would sit between them as a fact, acknowledged in the way men sometimes acknowledge things. Not through words, but through the continued willingness to show up when something needed showing up for. "How's the hand?" Marcus asked. Owen looked at his palm. The cut had healed into a thin pink line that would probably fade by summer into something invisible. "Fine." "Good." They finished their beers. Marcus left at 9, the way he'd arrived, without ceremony, with a handshake at the door that was slightly longer than a usual handshake, which was Marcus's equivalent of a full emotional speech. Owen washed the 2 bottles and put them in the recycling and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet and thought about the specific texture of the last 6 weeks. The way fear felt at 3 in the morning in a motel room. The way Lily's face looked when he crouched down in front of her and said something that needed to be said directly. The way the courthouse bench had felt under him when he'd watched Damian Blackwood walk out the door holding a flash drive that didn't matter anymore. He thought about Victoria Ashford, the way he did sometimes, less often now but still regularly. He thought about her not as a public figure or a victim or a CEO, but as a person who had spent 6 months doing a difficult, dangerous, lonely thing, building a case against people inside her own company, people she'd worked alongside, people who were still smiling at her in meetings while they'd already decided she had to be stopped. He thought about the particular courage of that, which wasn't the dramatic kind, not the ravine in a storm kind. It was the quiet kind, the kind that shows up every day and does the work without anyone watching. She hadn't managed to deliver it herself. That had been taken from her. But she'd built the thing, and she'd given it to a stranger at the last possible second, and it had gotten where it needed to go. That mattered to him, not as a lesson, not as an inspiration. He resisted those framings because they felt like they were about him, and this wasn't about him. It mattered as a fact about her. She'd done a hard thing, and she'd done it right, and the world was different because of it. Imperfectly, messily, through a chain of events she couldn't have designed or controlled, but different. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The surgery was on a Wednesday morning in April, when the light in the hospital corridors had that particular quality of early spring. Thin, tentative, not quite committed to warmth, but heading there. Owen had driven Lily to the hospital at 5:30 in the morning. She'd been quiet in the car, which was unusual for her, and he'd let the quiet be what it was, rather than trying to fill it. She had her book in her lap, the horse training one, still going, and she wasn't reading it, just holding it, and he understood that it was something to hold. He parked, and they walked in together through the main entrance, and the automatic doors breathed open with the particular sound of hospital automatic doors, which Owen had heard more times in Lily's 7 years than he would have chosen, and Lily reached over and took his hand without looking at him, which she did sometimes when she wanted the contact, but didn't want to make a production of needing it. He held her hand all the way to the pre-surgical check-in desk. Sandra was already there. She'd come separately, earlier, and was sitting in the waiting area with 2 coffees and an expression of someone who has been managing her own anxiety for several hours by keeping herself busy. She stood when she saw them and handed one of the coffees to Owen and crouched down to Lily's level. "Hey, Bug." "Hi." Lily looked at her. "You look tired." "I've been here since 5. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Sandra straightened up. "I wanted to." Lily considered this and seemed to find it acceptable. She looked around the pre-surgical area with the same methodical survey she applied to every new space, taking inventory, cataloging, deciding what she thought. Dr. Singh arrived at 6:15. She went through the pre-surgical checklist with Owen, efficient and thorough, and then she crouched down to Lily's level and talked directly to her, which Owen had always appreciated, not talking about her to the adults in the room, but to her, as if her understanding and her consent were the things that mattered, which they were. "You know what's going to happen today?" Dr. Singh asked. "You're going to fix the thing in my spine that makes my legs give out." "That's exactly right. Do you have any questions?" Lily thought for a moment. "Will I be asleep the whole time?" "The whole time. You won't feel anything. And when I wake up, it'll be different. Your back will be sore. You'll need to take it easy for a few weeks. But yes, when you heal, it should be very different." Lily nodded with the slow, deliberate nod of someone who has run a calculation and found it acceptable. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." She said it like she was agreeing to something reasonable that had been proposed to her, which was exactly what she was doing. And Owen looked at his daughter, this 7-year-old who had been navigating the unfair parts of her life with more steadiness than most adults he knew, and felt the particular pride that parents feel when their children show them something about themselves that wasn't taught, that just was. They took her back at 6:40. Owen walked with her to the doors they wouldn't let him past, and he stopped. And she stopped. And they looked at each other in the corridor under the fluorescent light that buzzed slightly. "I'll be right here," he said. "I know. When you wake up, I'll be there." "Dad." She gave him the look, the one she used when he was stating something she considered obvious. "I know." He almost laughed. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers for a moment, the way he'd done since she was a baby, their foreheads touching. Nothing said, the contact saying the thing that didn't need words. She let him. Then she pulled back and looked at him one more time and turned and followed the nurse through the doors. The doors swung shut. Owen stood in the corridor for a moment, and then he went back to the waiting room and sat down next to Sandra and picked up the coffee and held it with both hands. She said, "I know," he said. "Of course she did," Sandra said. He drank the coffee. It was bad. Hospital coffee, the kind that tastes more like the idea of coffee than actual coffee. And he drank all of it. The surgery took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Owen knew this with precision because he watched the clock, not obsessively. He walked, he talked to Sandra, he ate a granola bar from the vending machine that tasted like cardboard, and ate another one anyway because his body needed fuel, regardless of his aesthetic objections. But he was aware of time in the specific way that people are aware of time in surgical waiting rooms, each minute both longer than usual and more precisely accounted for. At 11:03, Dr. Singh came through the doors in her scrubs, with her mask pulled down around her neck, and her face carrying the particular expression of someone who is about to deliver good news and has learned not to lead with the expression before the words. "She did very well," Dr. Singh said. "The procedure went as planned. We were able to achieve the decompression we were looking for." She paused. "She's in recovery. You can see her in about 30 minutes. Owen put both hands on his knees and looked at the floor and took a breath. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was steady, which cost him something. "She's a tough kid," Dr. Singh said. "I'll come find you when she's ready." Sandra put her hand on Owen's arm. He let it stay there. Recovery was 6 weeks of careful, incremental, occasionally frustrating progress. Lily came home, to the new apartment, to the east-facing room, to the platform bed with the trundle underneath, 5 days after surgery, moving slowly and with a careful deliberateness that was completely unlike her usual physical confidence. She wasn't complaining about it. She was in her way treating it as a project, the way she treated most things, monitoring her own progress with a rigor that the physical therapist, a cheerful man named Dale, who came to the apartment twice a week, described as highly motivated, and that Owen recognized as pure Lily. "I did 15 minutes today," she told Owen one evening, 3 weeks post-surgery, sitting on the couch with an ice pack on her lower back that she was holding there without being reminded. Dale said 10. "So you did 15. Dale's going to be annoyed." "Probably a little." She thought about this. "I'll do 10 tomorrow to balance it out." "That's not how it works." "I know, but it's a reasonable gesture." He looked at her. She was sitting up straighter already than she had before the surgery. Not fully. She was still healing, but there was something in her posture that was different from before. Some quality of ease that hadn't been there when the nerve pressure had been constant. She'd told him, in the matter-of-fact way, that her legs felt different. Not normal yet. Not the normal she was heading toward, but different from the constant low-level wrongness that she'd been living with for long enough that she'd stopped being able to identify it until it started to lift. "Dad," she said, looking at the ice pack. "Yeah. Are we going to be okay, actually, going forward?" He considered the question seriously, which was the only way she'd accept it being answered. She'd asked a version of this before. "Are we going to be okay?" On the morning when he'd scooped her up and carried her through the park in her pajamas with men in black SUVs at the house. That time the answer had been a promise he was hoping to keep. This time was different. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, I think we are." She looked at him with the evaluating eyes. "You're not just saying that." "I'm not just saying that." She nodded. She repositioned the ice pack. "Okay," she said, and picked up her book. He watched her read for a minute. The evening light was coming in through the window, not the east-facing one, the living room window, which faced west, which meant the light at this hour was gold and specific, the kind that makes ordinary things look significant. The green couch, the slightly worn arm, Lily in her socks with her book and her ice pack, turning a page with the quiet concentration of someone fully inhabited in the present moment. He thought about what Sandra had said on the drive home from the FBI field office. "You have time now, Owen. That's the thing." He'd been understanding what she meant for weeks, slowly, the way you understand something that's the opposite of what you're used to. He'd been in emergency mode for so long, the slow emergency of Lily's medical situation, and the money and the math that never added up, and then the acute emergency of the drive and Blackwood and the burning house, that the absence of emergency felt unfamiliar. Like a sound you'd been living with so long you stopped hearing it, and then it stopped, and the silence was so loud it took time to trust. But he was beginning to trust it, incrementally, imperfectly, The way you trust anything that's new. He had a job starting the following Monday. Project management, a mid-sized commercial construction firm in the area that had found his resume through a contractor network. It paid more than framing work. It involved significantly fewer situations where he was outside in conditions that required describing to him as bad. He was not entirely sure he was going to be good at it, but he was going to try, which was the only available starting point for anything. He had a bench warrant that had been resolved, 2 fines paid, 1 short, and thoroughly undramatic conversation with a clerk who had not looked up from her computer throughout the entire process. He had an apartment with east light in the 2nd bedroom. He had a daughter who was healing. He didn't have everything he'd lost. He would not have everything he'd lost. Some things didn't get replaced. They just became part of the shape of what happened, the specific texture of the years, the way a scar becomes part of your hand. The house was gone. The mug was gone. The drawings on the refrigerator, all those purple horses and improbable landscapes that Lily had made in the years before everything changed, those were gone. But Lily was here, making new drawings. The refrigerator in the new apartment already had 4 of them on it, held up with magnets that Sandra had bought as a housewarming gift. Plain white disc magnets, 6 of them, which Lily had received with the gravity appropriate to a serious organizational tool. 3 months after Damian Blackwood's arrest, the first indictments were formally unsealed. Owen read about it on his phone on a Saturday morning while Lily was at a physical therapy appointment that she was now attending on her own, which had been her idea, and which Sandra drove her to, and which Owen had agreed to after a conversation that had lasted about 4 minutes before he ran out of reasons to say no. The indictments covered Blackwood and 4 other individuals, including Gerald Prout, the CFO from the conference room video, and 2 others Owen didn't recognize, executives from the international subsidiaries. The charges included conspiracy to violate export control laws, money laundering, and in Blackwood's case specifically, charges related to Victoria Ashford's death that Owen read twice and then sat with for a long time. The charges didn't use the word murder. They used language that was precise and legal and entirely clear in what it described, that Damian Blackwood had conspired to cause the death of Victoria Ashford to prevent her from disclosing material information. The legal phrase was specific and dense, and meant exactly what Owen understood it to mean. He put the phone down on the kitchen table. He thought about her on the mountain road, the way she'd pressed the drive into his pocket, the clarity of it, even half-conscious, even dying. She'd known exactly what she was doing. She'd spent 6 months building something, and in her last seconds, she'd made sure it didn't end with her. It hadn't ended with her. It had gone through him, imperfectly, through a chain of decisions that had been desperate as often as they'd been smart, and it had arrived somewhere. The people who'd killed her were facing federal charges. The operation she'd exposed was dismantled. The technology transactions she'd documented would be part of proceedings that went well beyond a corporate fraud case into something with national implications that Owen was not equipped to fully understand and didn't need to be. What he understood was this. She'd done a brave thing, and it had cost her everything, and the cost wasn't wasted. He wasn't a hero in this story. He needed to be clear about that with himself, because there was a version that could be told that would make him one, and he didn't want that version. He'd made the right choices, mostly after making some wrong ones. He'd been scared throughout. He'd thought about taking the money and walking away more than once. He'd had help. Marcus, Sandra, a librarian who'd stamped 2 stamps on an envelope without asking why. He'd had the luck of finding the password, and the luck of Agent Reyes being the one who opened the envelope, and the luck of Blackwood being arrogant enough to believe that Owen's desperation was the whole story. Luck mattered. Luck was real. Pretending it wasn't was its own kind of lie. But he'd also not walked away. And that was real, too. Reyes called him that afternoon. "I assume you saw the news," she said. "Yeah." "How are you feeling about it?" He thought about the question honestly. "I don't know exactly. Something like not relieved. That's not quite right. More like something settled, like a weight that found its place." "That's a reasonable thing to feel." "When does the trial start?" "That depends on how the defendants plead and how their legal teams approach it. Could be 6 months. Could be longer." She paused. "You may be called to testify." I want you to know that's a possibility. I know. And I want you to know your deposition was thorough. If testimony isn't required, it won't be because of anything you did or didn't provide. It'll be because the physical evidence is strong enough on its own. Okay? Owen. She used his first name, which she didn't do often. How's your daughter? He looked at the kitchen, at the refrigerator with the 4 drawings on it, at the magnet shaped like a plain white disc holding up a drawing that appeared to be a horse but might have been something else. Lily's artistic ambition sometimes exceeded her technique in ways that produced images with multiple valid interpretations. She's getting better, he said. Every week, a little more. Good, Reyes said. And she meant it. He could tell the difference by now between the professional courtesy and the genuine thing. That's good, Owen. The last conversation Owen had with anyone about what happened that winter was with Lily in June, 4 months after the surgery, on a Saturday when she walked to the park for the first time without his hand. Not alone, just he was there, 3 steps back, which was the distance they'd negotiated. Close enough to be close, far enough to be separate. She'd insisted on the separation. She'd said, with the specificity she brought to all negotiations, I need to know my legs will work when you're not right next to me. He'd understood that. He'd agreed to 3 steps. She walked along the path that ran through the park, the same park she'd crossed in her pajamas in the early morning of the worst day, which neither of them had mentioned but which Owen was aware of in his body as they walked. The morning was warm and the trees were doing the full summer thing, dense and various, and other people were in the park, kids on the equipment, a couple walking a dog that was very interested in everyone, an old man on a bench reading a newspaper. Lily walked, 3 steps ahead. Her gait was different from before the surgery. Not dramatically, not in a way a stranger would notice, but Owen noticed. The uncertainty was gone. The quality of her movement that had always been slightly careful, slightly watchful of the floor, slightly prepared for the legs to do the thing, it was gone. She walked like she trusted herself, which was the only way she'd ever wanted to walk and hadn't quite been able to. She made it to the end of the path and turned around and walked back. When she got to where Owen was standing, she stopped in front of him. See? She said. Yeah, he said. I see. She looked at him for a moment with the evaluating eyes. You're doing the face. What face? The one where you feel something and you're not going to say what. He looked at her. 7 years old, 8 and 2 months, which she had not let him forget. 8 years old, and she could read him cleaner than anyone he'd ever known. I'm proud of you, he said. That's what the face is. She considered this. That's a reasonable face to make, she said. I think so, too. She looked at the park around them, the trees, the other people, the dog still investigating the world with maximum enthusiasm. She looked at Owen. Dad, she said. Yeah, I know you did something when everything was bad. I know it was more than what you told me. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. It was. Was it scary? He thought about answering that in a way that was protective or softened or measured for a 7-year-old, and then thought about who his daughter was and what she deserved. Really scary, he said. Yeah, she nodded slowly. But you did it anyway. Didn't feel like I had a choice. You always have a choice. She said it with the certainty of someone who had thought about this, which she clearly had. You always have a choice. You just picked the hard one. He looked at her. She looked back at him. He didn't know what to say to that. He didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to something true is just to receive it. Okay, Lily said, concluding whatever internal process she'd been running. Can we get ice cream? It's 10 in the morning. We had breakfast 2 hours ago. That's enough of a gap. That's not how nutrition works. It's not how it works. He thought about it. He thought about all the mornings for the past year and a half when ice cream at 10 had not been possible because the math didn't allow for extras. He thought about the refrigerator with the drawings and the east-facing room and the surgery that had worked and the legs that now walked correctly through a park on a Saturday morning. Okay, he said, 1 scoop. 2. 1.5. She thought about this. Fine, she said. which meant she'd gotten what she wanted. She turned and started walking toward the park exit, toward the ice cream place 2 blocks over that she'd already scouted and evaluated and deemed acceptable. Owen fell in beside her, not 3 steps back. Beside her, which was where he'd always been and would keep being for however long she'd let him, which he understood would become less and less as she grew into the person she was already clearly going to be. Someone who didn't need 3 steps or 1 step or any particular distance, who would eventually walk on her own without the gap being negotiated. But that was later. That was years of later, specific and unmapped, and he intended to be present for all of it. For now, a Saturday morning in June, the park behind them, ice cream ahead, his daughter's legs working the way they were supposed to, the world ordinary and specific and real. He walked beside her. The morning was warm, the trees were full. That was enough. That was, for right now, exactly enough.